team, you had hundreds of people working on Northern Echo. And I actually looked in his book, and there were 12 reporters in the Bishop
Auckland.
Yeah, the Bishop Auckland office of the Northern Echo. Jeannie and I have been trying to estimate whether there are still 12 reporters in the entire Northern Echo now. And I think they're probably, it would be about that. So that, that is a very, very big decline in the number of people trying to find stories in a very important part of the country. And we need to try and sort of rebuild that capacity, I think.
Well, times, they are a-changing, as we all know, in the world of media. Your work is extraordinary. Congratulations from me, certainly. So, Jeannie Finlay, Yoshi Herman, thank you very much indeed. And one final thought as well, before you clap. There are more films to be seen tomorrow at the Truth Tellers DocFest. All the details are coming on your screen, so do stay tuned for that. Both of you, thank you. Thank you.
The rock stars have arrived. The power of photographs and the importance of photojournalism. The photographers here are the original storytellers. And David Walmsley, I'm David Walmsley, the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail, and it's an absolute honour to welcome this illustrious panel. Lindsay Adario, to my immediate right, Hannah Mackay, Reuters, and Marcus Yam of the Globe and Mail. Welcome. The images you'll see in this session will be upsetting. That's the whole point. We are here because we care, and we don't shy away from the reality of the world. And as Lindsay said to me off stage, if you're not upset by some of this, then you are AI. The sentient human being has more power than they realize, I think, in this current climate. My first question, Lindsay, is to you, because you've traveled so often. Harry Evans loved you. And you would meet often with him and commune. But you had to choose the stories to go to. And most recently, for the Atlantic magazine, under new ownership, very strong publication, you've been to Sudan and Chad. Let's take a look at some of the photos. Tell us about this child.
So, just to back up a little bit, I started covering Sudan over 20 years ago when I was covering the war in Darfur. And I went there for 6 straight years, and I thought, it was in my rearview mirror. And of course, a few years ago, I started talking to The Atlantic, and last year they asked me to go to Sudan with Anne Applebaum, who was here earlier. And this little girl, she was wounded in a mortar strike. And the irony was that a month earlier, I had been in Khartoum and in Omdurman, which is sort of a suburb of Khartoum. And it was about 10 o'clock at night, and a mortar landed about a block from where we were staying. And immediately I asked the intelligence guy who was our minder to take me to the hospital. And he did, surprisingly, because they usually say no to everything we ask. And he took me, and when I got there, there were children and women sort of splayed out amidst blood all over the floor of the hospital. There were, I think, 36 injured. And then I went back. I went into Chad, and we ended up getting access through the rebels. And the rebels took us to show us their civilian casualties. And this little girl was wounded around the same time, also in a mortar attack in the same area. And I just asked myself, was she on the other side? And was she the one who was maybe brought to a different place, or maybe not even a hospital? And I ended up meeting her in Darfur.
And how has the situation changed? You say you've been going back and forth to Sudan over 20 years. Has access improved? Has the challenge become more difficult? Has 14 million people displaced?
I think what we've learned, I've been covering war over 25 years, and I think what I've learned is that governments have learned not to let us in. I think there are so many conflicts now that we can't cover. We can't get into Gaza. It's almost impossible to get into Sudan. I've been trying actually for 6 months to get into Sudan, and I've been rejected. We can't get, there are so many places we just can't access. Iran is another place. Only a handful of journalists are allowed into these places. And that's a real tragedy, because we all suffer when we can't see the truth.
Hannah, you began with the Thompson family through Reuters news agency 9 years ago. And one of the most remarkable first assignments you had was to the far-off land of Myanmar. Let's have a look. Now, it's safe to say, Hannah, you'd never been to Myanmar before. Explain a little bit about your career up to that point.
Yeah, I think I'd been at Reuters about 6 weeks by the time I was sent on this assignment. It was a first of many. I'd only ever been on holiday to Spain, so this was but it really opened my eyes to the importance of journalism, and actually when you leave the UK you realise how valued cameras are. I think here in the UK it's a lot of no access. So this assignment was incredible for the openness to taking pictures of people, and it was towards the end of Reuters coverage, so I think by this point most of the refugees had set up base in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, and I was mostly there just to cover daily life, but then you saw them crossing the river. That was like the last big crossing from Myanmar, and so it kind of turned into a completely different situation to what I'd expected or anybody else expected, and this lady collapsed with exhaustion. They'd been walking for days, crossed a river, no belongings, nowhere to go. So yeah, it was really opened up my eyes.
So you began the assignment in Cox's Bazar, which was really hosting the destitute from Myanmar in Bangladesh, but you then moved into Myanmar.
We just went to the border. We couldn't get into Myanmar. It's very difficult. So this was at the border where they'd crossed in. Again, they had no idea where they were going, and I didn't either.
And tell us a little bit about the woman in the ditch.
She was part of the previous picture. Was how it looked for days of a constant flow of people just walking through, and she collapsed with exhaustion. And a few people, at first they were just on their own journey and walked past her, and then eventually people stopped and helped, and I don't know what happened to her, but I hope she at least made it to safety in the camp.
The Good Samaritan. You also mentioned that the joy not only of freedom of movement and the ability to cover the story, but also the colours.
Yeah. It's just, I can't even describe it now, even 9 years on, the amount of colour that I saw. You know, London's pretty grey at the best of times, so the clothing, the culture, the land, everything. It was an incredible first assignment.
Hell of a baptism, that's for sure. And Marcus, you have covered a lot of ground over the years in your career. You spent 12 years in Los Angeles with the LA Times. Of course, the big story that came there most recently was the profound fires that ravaged LA, particularly the Thomas Fire, which is a gigantic fire. Let's take a look at some of the images of Marcus and the fires of LA. I mean, it looks like a movie set, doesn't it? The whole idea of color, as Hannah said, in the contrasts of fire, it's made to be photographed. But tell us a little bit of the challenges that you face as a photographer when you're in the middle of an inferno.
Fires often, I mean, I would say that first, I will backtrack a little bit about this picture. One of the biggest challenges about fire is figuring out where it's going. So this fire, the Thomas Fire, actually started in Santa Paula, and I was coming off of a long work day, and it kicked off, and an evacuation order was issued, and I was driving towards it, but then I realized it was moving fast west. So I drove ahead, and we just guessed that it would end up in Ventura. So I just decided I'm going to go to Ventura and get ahead of this fire. And when I did, the fire was just starting to arrive, and I thought to myself, I went past all the people evacuating, all the cars lining up to drive out. I thought to myself, here's a news picture, but then maybe I should keep going. So I kept going, driving into the darkness, just to see, in my head, map out. I've never been to Ventura, so I thought to myself, I'm going to go explore Ventura. What a fun time to go. And somewhere in the darkness, I was kind of in my head mapping out the roads, and I came across a car, this car that was like turned on, with nobody in it. So I thought to myself, did something happen? Is this person okay? So I actually stopped to check. And I couldn't see anybody, but maybe a couple of minutes went by, and this woman just like quietly walks out of this house, puts a box in the car, and just drove off. And before I could even like stop her to say hi to her and everything. And actually, funny enough, a little backstory, I actually got an email from a reader, because I had been self-publishing, it was like middle of the night, our newsroom, the newsroom of the Los Angeles Times wasn't updating as fast as possible. So I was self-publishing on Twitter, and a reader actually wrote back and said that was his mother, and he's glad to see her actually change her mind and leave, basically.
Lindsay, conflict is never far from you. You've covered a lot of war, but Ukraine obviously has a special hold, I think, on everyone. And it's a place that you intimately documented for the New York Times. You've won and been a finalist for Pulitzers on that story. But let's go back to March the 6th, 2022, when you took what has become an iconic image of war. And in that moment, when you took this picture, you thought the New York Times wouldn't publish the photos because they showed a dead family. Tell us about that process. Both your idea of what to shoot, how you framed it, and how you had to fight with the desk, or how the desk accepted it.
Marcus and I were actually in Ukraine around the same time, or at the same time.
At the same time.
At the same time, and also working around Irpin. That's where this photo was taken. And basically, there was an exodus of people coming out of Irpin, the suburbs around Kiev. And for a photographer, it's hard to get information very quickly. We often have to just go to see what's happening. And so I went very early on a Sunday morning, and it was eerily quiet. There were people crossing this broken bridge, trying to get out of the suburbs and come to Kiev. And immediately you can hear a lot of shelling in the distance and artillery fire. And so we took cover behind this wall. And shortly after arriving, I was photographing people streaming. And I remember looking through my viewfinder and cursing because I was watching these little kids and parents struggling to sort of drag their kids to safety under fire. And suddenly a round came in, and it landed sort of a few hundred meters off in the distance. So my security advisor said, "Do you want to leave?" And I said, no, they're not going to hit this evacuation route. It's all women and children. They know that, they can't hit that. And then within like a few minutes, another round came in closer. And that's called bracketing for anyone who doesn't know the military terms, when you kind of zero in on a position. And so within seconds, I dove for cover and I popped up, and another round landed so close, it was like 30 feet away, that my entire neck was sprayed with what I thought was shrapnel, but it was gravel, thankfully. And by the time I popped up, everything was very dusty. I didn't know if I had been hit. I was bleeding. And our security advisor ran across the street, and when he called us over, we had come upon a family. And my instinct was to leave. We were still under fire. I was in shock. I knew that we had just narrowly survived. And I started shooting, and I had come upon this family feet first. And so I registered that there was a child. I saw the moon boots, and I worked my way around, and then we ran. We ran, and there were 2 more rounds that came in very close as we were leaving. And when I got back to the car, I messaged the New York Times and I said, I was just in this attack, and I didn't really know if I had made a photograph that was in focus or that would convey the drama. And sometimes, as anyone who's covered conflict, sometimes you convince yourself that actually it wasn't very dangerous, like maybe it was far away. And so I sent the photos, and then I started pleading with one of the foreign editors, like, please, can you look at these, and can you please go to bat for me and publish these? Because we were in the attack. It was not just a random attack. It was actually targeting civilians intentionally. And so, as a photographer, we don't have much power or sway. We just send the photos, and we hope that the editors will go with what we lobby for. And in the end, it ended up on the front page of the New York Times, and it was used in Congress to lobby for more funding for Ukraine to fight against the Russians, because it was exactly when Putin was saying he did not target civilians.
Thank you for that. And from that lost family to your own family. Your latest documentary is called Love and War, and it looks at the impact of your work on you and your sisters, on your kids, and on Paul, your husband. Let's watch a clip.
1 month in Ukraine, then maybe back 2 weeks, then maybe speaking engagement, one exhibition, and then back a little bit.
Your name's Mommy.
Yeah, my name is Mommy.
Then Ukraine, and then something else.
One of us has to be a constant in the kids' lives. Paul left Reuters. He started doing consulting. That enabled us to have a family.
Nice? You like it?
I've set it up so that if something does happen to me, they have Paul.
They have Paul. It's incredibly emotional. I've seen the whole doc. Given the cost that you might not come home, what keeps driving you?
I mean, it's the question that's going to be on my tombstone, because I get asked that question. And I don't really, I would say I've seen the impact of good journalism. I've seen the impact of good photography. I've seen people, sort of the light bulb go on. I've seen people change their minds because of good journalism. I hope to affect policy. I've been able to impact people with maternal death work. Merck for Mothers was started in part because of a photo essay I did, where they put $500 million aside to fight maternal death based on a photo essay, in part. And so I think if I can do anything to move the dial a little bit in this world, I will. And I can't not do it.
Thank you. Marcus, Afghanistan. It's a conflict that you've returned to again and again, 3 separate trips in less than 5 years. Let's take a look at some of the images that you took when documenting specifically the US withdrawal and the Taliban returned to power in 2021. These images won you a Pulitzer. To get a sense of timing, you were flying into Kabul, and isn't that the common theme of everyone? As everyone else is leaving, the photographers are heading in. And you went into Kabul while the US troops were flying people and themselves out, and the world's media headlights were fully on Afghanistan. How did you ensure that your work stood out and was more than competitive?
Very good question. I mean, it's hard to, as a news photographer, you always look for these like singular image of the day, what drives, what is the image that speaks to the day, and I was obviously started out by doing that first. I had gone in a day before the country fell. I literally took probably one of the last commercial flights in before the airport closed down. And I realized I wasn't getting reinforcements anytime soon. People were stuck outside, and I had to figure out how else to cover it because I was in some ways, no pun intended, outgunned. And there were so many other, and I wasn't able to get to a lot of places just because my driver had just abandoned us to save his family. I told him to go do that. And I was taking a yellow cab around, and I had to pick and choose, basically. I couldn't be there for some of the defining moments when the country fell. And my then editor, who's now retired, and I sat down after a very frustrating first day where I missed all the pictures, but I did a lot of reporting on what was going on. And we were looking at what everybody was doing that first 24 hours. We were looking at CNN, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. And like a good sports coach, he asked me, what do you see? What patterns do you see? And it's like, he was trained a chemical engineer, and I was trained an aerospace engineer. So I understood systems. So I said, everybody's obsessed with the Taliban. And he was like, correct. And we said, what do you not see? Nobody is talking about the losers. So we created a model for ourselves. Moving forward, that day onwards, day two, end of day one, we would only look at all these stories that we would do from the eyes of the loser and take that perspective moving forward instead of being obsessed with the Taliban. I mean, we did a few Taliban stories here and there, but I never tried to give them a platform or tried to, emphasize that as much.
So in identifying the through line as the losers, the LA Times worked with you to publish the work with a bunch of text overlaid as well. How did the assignment change and the storytelling of the story change in the weeks that you were there?
A lot of what was going on was rapidly changing. When we were on the ground, there was no clarity. In the early days, I mean, everybody was evacuating. Nobody knew what they would do to Westerners or let alone journalists. I mean, I fought very hard to stay in country. I actually defied evacuation orders because as a student of history, this echoes of the Vietnam War. And I was very adamant to stay behind because the lasting image of the Vietnam War is the American helicopter pulling people off rooftops. But you don't remember the images after that. And I was, determined to just stay. And so my then editor also fought for me to stay, and we realized the only way to do it is a accumulation of observations, which is where the idea of like diaries came along. So he asked me like every day, write your thoughts down, what you saw, what you did, and I did it in a form of an email to them sometimes, here's my little diary for the day, like what I did, and we just turned that into a long piece basically and published it.
And was this also in an attempt to compete against the theft of attention with readers who simply see so much visual work and they move on from one thing to the next? Do you find that technique provides some stickability for the work that you do?
I don't know if it's like a clear intention on my part to get attention and get readers to stay on it, but it was more to just grasp at something tangible. I mean, I wanted to collect observations. We have a proximity with our work, that proximity and responsibilities are the two tenets that we have, and we have to try to make sure we document everything, even if we're unsure of it. We have to try to, in some ways, put it in a picture and put it in words. And I think that what I was doing, I was also, again, self-publishing, thanks to, in the heyday of Twitter, before pre-Elon Musk Twitter. And I was able to just push out dispatches, as we went, basically, as fast as possible, because I would have a system where I would file quickly, but I also push it out immediately.
I have a question. Am
Please.
I allowed?
Of course, of course. This is the management-defying group.
I never follow the rules. The LA Times didn't have a problem with you putting things on Twitter before they were published, or before, because we could never do that for most of the publications I work for, ever. I mean, nothing can see the light of day until like 10 days after they've selected what they want.
No, actually, because the LA Times is also legacy media, they were trying to figure out this new frontier, and I was one of the first few photographers to go in and change the way they do live coverage. I mean, when I joined them in 2014, I was like live tweeting a protest already, and was like sending photos and tweet, like, and send it directly to the desk also. And they had no problems with it, because for them, it was more about, it's almost like the idea of throwing a pizza at the ceiling and seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
And they were willing, to their credit, to let that experiment go through.
If the desk is asleep, you've got the perfect alibi, haven't you?
Exactly. I mean, half the things happen.
I would have phoned you, but I wanted you to have your beauty sleep. Yeah?
Well, the Californian time zone is so far away that, like, when things happen, you're oftentimes asleep. So I have to wait for them to wake up and work into the wee hours of the night wherever I was. But it was very rewarding getting to self-publish and getting to just push out dispatches. I wasn't trying to put an analysis in anything. I was just saying, here's what I saw. And the same in Ukraine also.
Lucky.
Okay, we're going to move away from war and misery for a moment. Hannah, you had a number of images that were bringing out some chuckles with the crowd in the video roll. You've covered a lot of big events, popes, prime ministers, and princes, and a number of them have become viral snapshots of big ceremonial moments. Let's take a look at the picture of the royals on the balcony, and some of the challenges that you face when you're shooting such an orchestrated, essentially a photo op.
Yeah, I mean, these kind of assignments aren't my favourite to cover. And if there's any member of the royal family in the room, like, that's not personal to you. It's just they're so restrictive, and you're kind of penned in, and you're almost told what to photograph. So it's difficult to find something different than what, often there can be 30 photographers standing right next to you, all doing the same. So it's completely different to, say, the previous set of pictures. But, being a wire photographer for Reuters in London, it is part of the job. So this is I think it was the Troop in the Colour, which, happened every year for the Queen's birthday, and it's a big ceremonial event, and you're very, very far away in a long lens.
So where are you when you're taking this?
So this was taken on the Queen Victoria Memorial, which is sort of the roundabout opposite Buckingham Palace, and they watch her fly past. I could see something was going on in my lens with Louis, but it was only when I looked back I realised what he was doing. And
so you couldn't capture it in real time because they were such small specks?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our job is hit and hope, so I was sort of just...
The secret side.
I was hitting and hoping with this. And a lot of people didn't get the picture because the setup was people had tripods and were swapping between cameras, but I just made sure that I stuck on a really long lens on the balcony, because when kids are involved, Harry did the same when he was a kid, so I think everybody knew this reputation of Prince Louis, he might do something a bit comedy, so yeah.
Well, I think there's a little bit more than hidden hope. All of your eyes are special. Let's move to the next image, which is truly a photographer's eye. You took this picture some 5 years before Prince Philip, the then Duke of Edinburgh, died. Tell us a little bit about the journey of this picture, because of course it went viral in its own way.
Yeah, I mean, it took a while, but I originally took it was his last public engagement, and again, you're put into a position, and a lot of the time it's luck of the draw with the agencies all rotate positions, and you kind of put where you're put. And on the day, this picture didn't do well at all, just purely because the UK papers went with the same picture but from the front. So I was like in the back, nobody really cared about it. I liked it because it was clean, and it's often difficult to get a clean picture on these rotors because they're surrounded by people. And my only memory of this, I think it was 2017, was that a few weeks after I took it, somebody called me and wanted a copy of the picture, and they said, we're the hearing aid company that supplied his hearing aids. Yeah, so I was like, I passed them on to the right person at Reuters. I didn't just give them the picture. And then it was when he died, it became something, because I think it just told the story of a goodbye. And yeah, it did really well after he passed away.
Yeah, let's show the next photograph, which comes, or the next use of the photograph. It comes 5 years later, and it dominates the front pages of papers on both sides of the Atlantic. And it's as iconic and as silent and as clean a picture that, again, needs no words.
Yeah, I think, you know, you see pictures of Trump and heads of states, and often you can identify them from behind or as a silhouette. And so I think this is just one of those that, like you said, there's no words for it, but you know who he is and what's going on.
And it also inspired other artists as well, if we can show the next image.
Yeah, but I reached out to him and was like, hey, I've seen your cartoon based on my photo. No reply. Yeah.
Put him in touch with the hearing aid company.
And you have a bone to pick with the royal family too, don't you?
Yeah, the royal family Instagrammed it. No tag. About 2.5 million likes. So if there is anyone from the royal family in the room, sort it out.
Get Hannah out of the pen. Lovely. And then to contrast that, to come to the close of the panel, there's a photograph here which again went round the world. And this is a photograph taken at the vigil in Clapham Common in London in 2021, following the murder of 33-year-old Sarah Everard by, of course, a serving police officer. And the image is taken at what began as a vigil and turned into a protest. Let's walk through some of this imagery, Hannah, specifically some of the technical elements, and then the backstory about how you ultimately got right in front of this image that went around the world.
It was very dark, and it was in the middle of Clapham Common with no lights, and I think it was the height of lockdown. So I think by this point, people had gone a bit crazy and needed a reason to leave the house other than just to go to Sainsbury's. And so this vigil became quite a big event. It was almost like going to the theatre. It was quite a crazy thing to be a part of. And as the evening went on and the vigil turned into a protest, the police began to arrest people. And I'd gone away from the bandstand, which is where they are now, to try and...
You were in a pen.
I was sort of, yeah, in my favourite place, in a pen. And I left to show to try and get something of the police arresting someone, just to show that side of the evening. But it was really difficult because there was no lights. And so I left the bandstand pen, and I didn't get a picture. And our time was against me because I had to get to Downing Street because they were putting out a candle on the street. So I was conscious of time.
So Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. He was going to be lighting a candle.
I was thinking, can he hold out? I need to stay. And then I went back to the bandstand because I could see there was more arrests sort of happening there. And I realised there was a ring of police officers around it. And I couldn't get back in. And I was like, I need to be the other side of these police officers. So I just said to, I went up to one and I was like, hey, and I was like, showed them a press card. And I was like, oh, I've dropped my lens cap in the bandstand. Can I...
So this is the first fib of truth tellers.
And he was like, okay. So he comes with me, and then we bump into a colleague, and he was like, what are you looking for? I was like, a lens cap. And he's like, oh, so there's 3 of us looking for this imaginary lens cap in the dark. And my colleague's making a big thing of it. He's like, you don't need it. You don't need this. And I was like, shut up. Like, I do. Anyway, eventually I found the lens cap and I was back on the bandstand. And about a minute later, this happened. So, and luckily there was a cameraman with a modelling light, or else I wouldn't have seen it.
Yeah, because the challenge is that it is pitch black. So you have, is that a television light behind? So it's it's backlit. But you're not able to use flash in a picture like this, right? Can you explain why?
Well, police officers' high-vis jackets are a photographer's worst enemy. They just flash on silver strips. So a couple of photographers had flashes. I didn't. And this, thankfully, was lit by a cameraman. And, yeah, I mean, this kind of blew up overnight, this picture. And, you know, it was a story that started as a very domestic story, and it moved into, like, you know, a global movement of women feeling or saying that they were feeling failed by the police, and how it felt to be alone in the dark, you know, in a similar way that they were thought maybe Sarah Everard had.
It's the ingenuity, I think, on display this afternoon that you hear from all three of these incredibly powerful humans who take the full opportunity to use photography for its main purpose. And it is an absolute pleasure and a privilege to say thank you to all of you this afternoon.
So now we come to a very exciting moment for us, and I think for all photographers, and for everybody in the photography world, in the visual world and in the journalism world. We've just seen how photographers are the original storytellers. In an age of fakery and fiction, the photographer stands true. But all they ask for is time and support. That's why I am so over the moon with pride in announcing this afternoon the inaugural Sir Harry Evans Photojournalism Fellow. Thanks to the generosity of David Thompson and his family, this fellowship has one of the most richly endowed awards in photojournalism. And it also offers the winner that rarest of prizes, the gift of time. A year working with Reuters and Canada's Globe and Mail, whose David Walmsley you just saw as moderator, mentored by both organizations' leading photo editors and supported by their newsroom resources to carry out a long-form project on the topic of their choice. I am so thrilled to announce our inaugural fellow, Kiana Hayari, whose images you just saw. She won out against global competition, impressing the judges with the depth of her portfolio and the ambition of her proposal. Born and raised in Iran, she spent her career working across underreported regions in the Middle East, Central Asia and beyond, capturing women and communities living through conflict, displacement and political upheaval. Please welcome Kiana, our inaugural Sir Harry Fellow in Photojournalism.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So proud. I'm very, very honored. Thank you. Really. Hi, everyone. One Saturday afternoon, I stood outside of a school in west of Kabul where over 90 girls aged 11 to 17 had just been killed. The street was still thick with dust and smoke. Blood-stained shoes were scattered all over the ground, and school bags torn open and notebooks spilling their pages onto the road. And families were calling out names that will not be answered. I remember standing there, holding my camera, and feeling the weight of a question that at the time I couldn't answer. A question that would later form the core of the project that I will be pursuing under this fellowship. 2 days from now marks the 5th anniversary of Sayyid al-Shahada's school attack. After nearly a decade of living in Afghanistan, I have lost count of how many times I arrived at the scene of an attack on a school, university, or educational center. And every time, I had the same question. Why are men in power so threatened by education? Over time, I came to understand that this story is beyond just Afghanistan or any other bomb, any other war. Education is one of the most powerful tools we have to resist authoritarianism, misogyny, racism, and extremism. And yet, around the world, it is under attack, increasingly. Schools are not only bombed, they are banned, segregated, censored, and politically manipulated. When education systems collapse, entire communities lose their future. Shattered Classrooms is a visual investigative project that examines how education systems are targeted, disrupted, and weaponized across different parts of the world, but also following the people who continue to fight to protect them, and the students who continue going back to school. Because alongside the destruction, there is always resistance. The project builds on work that I've already documented in Afghanistan and Ukraine, from underground schools for girls operating in secret to classrooms built under the ground to withstand missile attack. You know, my experiences in Afghanistan has changed how I perceive my role as a storyteller. At a time where truth is contested and our attention is fleeting, my work is not about just witnessing, but it's about staying with the story even after the headlines move. Stories don't end when they are published. They continue as books, exhibitions, public talks, and sometimes they return to classrooms to be used as tools for reflection and discussion. That commitment is deeply aligned with Sir Harry Evans' legacy. He believed in the power of photojournalism to inform, to challenge, and to hold truth to account. To be part of a fellowship that carries his name is not only an honor, but it's also a responsibility. This fellowship will allow me to continue my work with the depth, time, and rigor that it demands, not only to document what is being lost, but to follow these stories until they shift something, until they're seen, they're understood, and they cannot be ignored. I'm deeply honored to be named as the inaugural fellow. I want to thank Tina Brown and the jury for their trust, Durham University for their partnership, David Thompson and his family for their generosity. I'm also grateful to Mei E. Wong, from Reuters, for her guidance, and she'll be working with me closely on this project, and to David Walmsley and the Global May for their collaboration. I also want to thank Elizabeth Christ, whose mentorship helped shape the first chapter of this work and pushed it beyond Afghanistan. At a moment when authoritarian politics and right-wing movements are gaining ground globally, this is not just a story about schools. It's about the future and who gets to shape it. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, so good. Really. So good. Yeah, no. Thank you. I can't wait to see what work she produces and which we can all look at next year. In the meantime, we're going to break for tea and we come back 25 minutes for the last block of the Truth Tellers Summit, which you won't want to miss because we also have an extremely special finale at the end, which I think you're going to want to be here for. So, see you in 25 minutes.
You've been watching our live coverage of an investigative journalism summit featuring conversations with journalists, authors, and advocates. Our live coverage from London will resume shortly. While we wait, here's a discussion from the event earlier today.
Sir Harry really encapsulated that fearlessness. It's what he did. It is what he was. And to pick up from Tina, journalism is under assault in a way that we haven't seen for a long time. And the question that we're asking today is how to stay fearless against those threats. We don't have the Pope up here, but we have the next best thing, frankly. Four giants of the industry, a ridiculously high-flying panel to try and help us navigate some of the questions that we are all asking continuously throughout our daily jobs. Emma Tucker is the editor of the Wall Street Journal, which is bucking the trend now with a 20% increase in overall subscriptions, including print, since she took over in 2023. Christiane Amanpour, CNN's chief international anchor, whose career has made courage in the field virtually synonymous with her own name. Patrick Radden-Keefe, one of the most relentless investigative storytellers of our time, author of many acclaimed books. His latest Sunday Times bestseller is London Falling. And Catherine Viner, editor-in-chief of The Guardian, the longest-serving female editor in Fleet Street history, and says the definition of a good journalist is somebody who's relentless and never gives up. And Kath probably herself is feeling that at the moment, coming straight off the back of a speech talking about the question of how reality itself is under threat and feeling fake. Let me start with you, Emma. What is the greatest threat to your work at the moment? This is a question I'll ask to each of you.
Okay, I'll be brief, but I've got three. I think, well, first of all, I'd say, the press in America is doing a fantastic job. It's still free. It's still doing what it needs to do. But the first problem is the environment in which we're operating is becoming much more challenging. It's getting much, much harder to do the kind of journalism that we're talking about today. Right. The second thing is trust. The sort of cratering of trust in established media is something that's a problem for all of us, and it's on all of us to solve that. And the third issue facing us all is, how do you monetize news in a world of AI when everything's being disintermediated, and producing the kind of journalism that we're talking about today is very, very expensive.
Christiane, you're on the front line. You're facing out. What is the greatest threat for you?
Well, in addition to what Emma says, I would say, social media, the weaponization of the truth, the lack of trust in the truth, the lack of trust in institutions, the future, as you say, of us actually being able to survive in this medium, digitization, how do you monetize, etc. And then I would say, just like in the field, when you're confronting leaders who simply want to kill the messenger and do not want to hear the truth, right, and you're operating in their backyard, you're physically under threat, you're physically unable to do the story. Often you're injured, you're imprisoned, you're killed, and this is a fact. They just said the statistics for last year. And now in the democratic world, I'm talking about the authoritarian world out there, the Wild West or East or whatever. Now in the democratic world, we're under unacceptable threat by leaders who will talk about, who believe that we are there simply to be sycophants and megaphones and bolster them, and they do not like when we actually report the truth. I happen to believe there is a truth. It's based on facts and evidence. And there is a truth. It's not fungible. And I think that we have to understand and accept that it is not our job to be liked by any leader, not a democratic leader, not an authoritarian leader. It's our job to serve the people and to speak truth to power. And that is what happens, especially in the United States, through the press. We're accountable. The president is accountable to the people through us. That's our job. The fourth estate. Period. End of story.
This obviously gets harder as I go round, because I'm sure you agree with what the first two have said. You could just say here. What would you add, Patrick?
I mean, I agree with all of that. I think that to back up a bit, and you've picked up on some strands of this, to me the biggest threat is a sort of in some ways a more subtle one, which is this idea of the assault on reality itself, just a kind of uncanniness to our existence these days. I think some of this is accentuated by political leaders who have, obviously demonized the press and sort of raised this notion that everything is kind of a he said, she said, subjective situation. I think some of it is technological, and we see that both with these kind of algorithmic communities that pull people deeper and deeper into one way of seeing the world or another. But I think increasingly we see it with AI. I'm sure some of you as well get, half of the email I get these days, I can tell there's a kind of uncanniness to what I'm reading, and it just has a sort of slippery quality. And what I worry about is that that's going to make people just start to sort of doubt the sense that there is any kind of tangible reality out there. What I would say for people in this room is that we need to embrace the idea not just that truth is a kind of defendable philosophical principle, but also that truth is a process. It's a way of doing your job and showing your work. And I think that we have to kind of defend that as an idea moving forward, and that hopefully with a kind of like-minded community of people trying to do this work with integrity and hold power to account, we can defend these principles that have, they've gotten us this far.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, Kath, we wouldn't have been talking about one of the biggest threats being questioning reality itself, right?
Yeah, so that was, as you kindly mentioned, this speech, which we published as a long read in The Guardian today, which is sort of saying, if we used to talk about fake news, but now reality itself feels fake. And I think that has big challenges for news organisations, but it also does have big opportunities because, if we stay committed to the truth and not fall into the trap of AI slop, then I think, we can differentiate ourselves and show our value in society. But the challenge also at the same time of authoritarianism, as of last year, more people in the world live in autocracies than democracies for the first time in many decades. And obviously there's, even in democracies like the US, there's the erosion of democratic norms, and that always leads to people to go after the press. I think those challenges coming at the same time are uniquely difficult.
I want to talk about the scoop, because that's a moment where you actually feel that you are challenging the establishment and you are getting results. Emma, you've had an extraordinary year for the Wall Street Journal. You broke the story of Epstein's birthday book, just to remind people Trump's contribution within it, he denied. Can you just take us inside some of that process? I know it's still under legal wraps, and this is going to put parameters around what you can say, but just the process, how does it go from being an inkling, being a source, being an idea, to something that actually lands on the page, that you sign off as editor and say, I'm happy?
Well, the inkling bit is almost the worst bit, because it'll be when you get wind of the fact that this story is coming your way, at which point, as Kath will know, you're like, oh God, I'm about to enter a whole world of pain here. And it was. But, I mean, what I can say about that story was it's a really good example of why the kind of journalism that we all are that we're all endeavouring to keep alive and focus on is challenged, because it took an awfully long time. It took a huge amount of resources.
Can you tell us? Can you give us a time frame or a number of people?
Numbers of people. If you take in all the editors, all the reporters, and then the legal team and the standards editor, it was at least a team of 20, if not more. And these are, very experienced, well-paid journalists. And I think the whole process must have taken well over 6 months. And my point is, in a world of AI, these are the stories we have to be focusing on, the ones that tell people something they didn't know, the ones that truly sort of move the dial on a conversation. And this one triggered a whole host. It sort of led to the sort of the pressure that, because we didn't just do the first story, we did the second story. We ran towards the fire after we'd published the first one. These stories require a huge amount of effort, resources, and legal expertise. They are very, very expensive. You have to have deep pockets and a stiff backbone to do stories like this.
And as you publish, are you expecting the reaction that you got from Trump? I mean, do you have your legal team literally lined up waiting for the incoming fire?
I think it was inevitable that there was going to be a strong response, and there was. But, this is the challenge. I mean, interestingly, I would say one of the biggest challenges to us now isn't so much what happens afterwards, it's what happens before you even publish.
Right.
And that is a massive challenge for us. So what's happening now in America, I mean, I think British journalists are probably used to this with injunctions and slaps and all the rest of it. But increasingly it is the case that before you even get to publication, lawsuits come raining down on you. A sort of a whole torrent of legal letters come your way, and the lawyers are using these deep-pocketed people are doing this as a PR strategy, because then other journalists then write up, oh look, so-and-so is suing the Wall Street Journal for some reporting that they're doing. They haven't even published the story. so they that can then point to it, it can't be true. Other journalists write the story up. And it's just, and then guess what? Everybody gets tied up. The lawyers are busy. The reporter's working on the story. Instead of working on the story, they're having to deal with the lawyers. It's also the case that a lot of stories that used to get dismissed by courts no longer get dismissed. So we then get caught up in, answering the questions that are
previous publishers.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, the point is that the Trump story sort of epitomised how difficult and expensive these stories are. But at least the defamation came after we'd published. These days, increasingly, we're getting legally challenged before we even get to publication.
And Kath, Trump recently dropped his defamation claim against The Guardian, and The Guardian also won a lengthy libel lawsuit against Noel Clarke. I guess these are not just victories in their own right. They must give a sort of ballast of confidence to the paper to go on and do the next thing, right?
Yeah, yes, I mean, with Noel Clarke, that was 6 weeks in the High Court. All of our journalists put on the stand for days on end. It was just, you could see the reporting was so good. The work they'd done was so unbelievably thorough. Every source was, not just fact checked, but can you tell us someone you can talk to? Can you show us WhatsApp from the time? It was so unbelievably well done that I really thought it would be an absolute outrage if we lost. But still, it was 6 weeks of our time, actually 2 years of our time preparing.
And are you nervous as the editor, or do you say, this is watertight, I can leave them to it?
I mean, you don't leave them to it, no. But I think,
in terms of the worrying.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think this is where actually the Guardian's ownership was really helpful. So we're owned by a trust. We're not owned by, a billionaire owner or shareholder saying just settle and make it go away. They're saying if you think you want to stand up for the journalism, you should stand up for the journalism. And so I think our ownership really helped us, and then I felt very encouraged to do so. But we did put a lot on the line. At one point he was asking for a lot of money.
Yes. Yeah. Patrick, we were on stage together last night, and you said the only people that ever sue me are the rich, or the only people that threaten me, you said, are the rich, right? So this all comes from a position of power, trying to shut down whatever they can.
Yeah, no question. I mean, this was in response to a question about my book and some of the gangsters that I've been dealing with and, how safe or unsafe I felt. And I said the irony is with all the gangsters and drug lords that I've written about over the years, the only people who threaten to sue me or who threaten me at all really are the billionaires. And I feel as though we should acknowledge, right, that each of us up here is speaking to you from the position as a kind of representative of relatively powerful media institutions on the landscape. I mean, I'm sort of encouraged to hear you talk about the kind of backbone and the fight that you're putting into it. And I do think that it's important that we sort of have that spirit of fight, but we also have to concede that there are freelance journalists, there are small media organizations, there are startups, there are people trying to do reporting in other countries where the legal protections are not necessarily as robust as they are here. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I do think that some of it is actually a sense of kind of camaraderie and esprit de corps among the kinds of people who are in this room. I think about my wife who's here, Justina Gadzowska, runs an investigative nonprofit, The Sentry, which does terrific work on the financing of conflict and on illicit finance. And we were at a party in New York a few weeks ago. And there was a particularly noxious law firm, which I won't name, which is really in the business of sending the kind of legal letters that you're talking about. And I had a kind of quite intense epistolary relationship with a lawyer at this law firm for several years when I was writing a book about the Sacklers. And my wife, who's recently just launched a big investigation with the Sentry, had just recently received a letter from the same firm. And she was talking to a friend of ours who's a lawyer, and she said, oh, it's funny, now I'm getting legal letters from the same firm. And this guy said, relationship goals. And I thought, this is the spirit that we need to have, as we kind of march into this. We need to do it sort of, in a spirit of competition, but also in a sense of solidarity.
But that is the key, isn't it? Because it should be maybe one for all and all for one, but that's not how we work in the media. And there are really obvious examples now when a female journalist gets called piggy, or when somebody is shouted down in a White House press room. I mean, everyone should walk out. We don't. Right?
Well, so that's my view. I mean, I've said in many public forums that it should be like the NATO Article 5. Let's not mention Trump degrading that, but it is all for one or one for all. And I believe in a public environment, like if you're invited into the White House or into the Pentagon or into the Oval Office or in all those places, there is a contract. You're not just there to be slavish, you're there to actually do your job and challenge respectfully, professionally, what is happening. And once it gets personal and vindictive and unacceptable, I do think there's a polite way to say these are not the workroom conditions that we expect. In any other corporation, you would be taken to the employment tribunal. I mean, seriously, what? It's not okay. And I have publicly said that many, many times. I've stood up for my female colleagues. Very fortunately, it hasn't happened to me in my job, even though I've been confronted with some of the worst monsters on the planet. They have not gone personal. And even I once challenged President Clinton. I'm not a White House correspondent. I'm not a U.S. anchor. I don't get to interview sitting presidents. But once I interviewed from Sarajevo in a press conference, a global press conference, President Clinton. And I was listening to what he said. He was trying to get reelected. It was a foreign policy conversation. And then there was some questions. CNN choose me. The entire CNN high command was sitting there. It was live at CNN. There was Clinton, huge face of those of us on this big screen. And I basically asked him why his policy over Bosnia, this is 1994, was constantly flip-flopping, and why he was picking the agenda of the Serbs, who had an agenda as they were slaughtering the Bosnian Muslims in Sarajevo. And he got very angry. I mean, his face went really red, and he said to me, "There have been no constant flip-flops, madam." And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not going to survive this. But to his credit, he was not vindictive. He didn't stand there and punch back at me and punch down, and nor did my bosses. Each and every one of them apparently went white. And then they said, okay, you did a good job. They probably thought they were going to get penalized. And they didn't. And I think that's really important to be supported by our leaders, because freedom of the press is not just on us. It's on all our leaders as well. They have to support us. They have to. So all of these lawsuits and all the rest of it, because those bringing them often are frivolous, as you know, and they're designed to chill. It's called the chilling effect. They're designed to pre-censor us in many ways. As long as we're truthful, as long as we have the facts, as long as we've done our real, proper job as journalists, we have to stand up to it, like all these people are.
I agree. I totally agree. But I think we also have to look at to our own behaviour before we get too self-satisfied. And I mean, I was really proud of the stuff we did on Epstein and Trump. But, as journalists and as news organisations, we have to show that we're not picking an agenda. And the year before, we had done the story about Biden being too old for the job. And I was genuinely shocked that when we published that story, I had messages from other people in the US media saying, we don't understand how you could do that story. So it felt like we did it. We did it, but the rest of the press were very ambivalent about the story. So my point is, we have to show that we don't have an agenda, that we are observers, we're not participants, and that we are there to do our job. And I think part of the trust issue is that we have to show we're willing to do...
It's called being a journalist.
Yes,
truthful,
exactly.
not neutral. You have to cover all sides of the story, and that doesn't mean taking sides.
Kath, do you think British journalists would have a different approach to the White House journalists? I mean, there was a memorable moment with Dominic Cummings in 10 Downing Street, where he tried to filter off the ones he allowed to stay and the ones he didn't. And I think, to their credit, most of them walked out. Right?
Yeah, I am quite confused by it and quite surprised. And people tell me that it's because there's a pool and there's pool reporters are doing the job for everyone else. But I just think as a collective, why not just stand up and work out? I think, though, isn't it true that in the briefing room, they've now got, he's put so many kind of far-right bloggers and influencers and so on that it wouldn't be everybody. Lots of people would stay, and so then you'd just be taking yourself out of the accountability
That's the risk, isn't it? That you walk out and nobody else comes out.
But I don't know why they don't. The piggy and so on. I don't know why you wouldn't just.
Can I just have one thing though? I mean, is there not a slightly awkward wrinkle here? And I had this thought a week or two ago when the White House Correspondents' Dinner happened. And you had all of these people from news organizations going to this dinner, which at this point has become kind of a parody, and then hilariously in some cases going to the dinner and sort of explaining it away and saying, oh, it's important for sources and so on. Of course I find it all a bit gross, but I need to be there to cultivate sources, and maybe we should just cancel the whole thing, but as long as it's going on, I really should be there. And I think part of what we should acknowledge is that Trump has in some respects been very good for business, that these enterprises which are in the business of getting clicks and selling subscriptions and so on and so forth have found that the Trump administration makes great copy, and sometimes it's outrage copy. But you have these two things that are kind of in tension, right? Where on the one hand, you want to hold power to account, and on the other hand, this is like the most entertaining show on earth. This is a reality TV presidency that has kind of turned politics into entertainment by other means. And I think, listen, I don't know that there's any news organization that has figured out how to thread that needle, but I do think it's a kind of a third rail that we need to acknowledge, is that there is a kind of sense that you want to sort of to be there, to be in the room, in part because you need to keep the organization going.
Off, though? It turns a lot of people off Trump as well at the same time, as well as being kind of addictive and sort of what's he said now. I think lots of people are turning off from politics and turning off from...
I also think we make way too much about who's in the pool, you know, who's got access to the White House. When did a good story, in what I would call a good story, ever come out of a White House press briefing? And in fact, when I was at the Sunday Times, we had an excellent political reporter who got kicked out of the lobby because he upset Dominic Cummings. I can't remember what it was. I've never got better stories out of him because he wasn't going.
He wasn't in the same place as
he
else.
had to go out and do some reporting. It was like, so I think we are at risk of getting a little caught up in.
Heaven forbid you pick up the phone.
Yeah, really.
But I think we all know that no journalist is going to turn down the White House dinner next year just in case. Christiane, can I talk to you? We just started to touch on corporate ownership, which does seem to me quite an important strand of the whole fear question. Pete Hegseth, the world's favourite frat boy supremo, has said that the sooner David Ellison owns CNN, the better. And CNN has become this sort of lightning rod, hasn't it, for this administration? Does it change what you do? Do you fear what is coming at you now in terms of a change of...
Clearly I'm concerned, and I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say about a corporate thing that's underway, but I am obviously, as a person, as a journalist with a record, concerned. And I'm concerned based on what's happened to the other things that he's taken over already, like CBS News, right? I mean, do I have to list what's happening there? I mean, hemorrhaging viewers, probably hemorrhaging money, this ideological realignment of CBS and the destruction potentially of 60 Minutes, one of the literally the legacy. I mean, nobody can match 60 Minutes for a brilliant television, magazine, show that's been doing hard news and cultural news and for decades and decades. Top-rated, top moneymaker for the network, in any event, all of that. So clearly, obviously, I'm concerned. I would like to think that we would have the very basic, which is editorial independence. I'm hoping for that. I know many of us at CNN are incredibly, including leadership, are very, very committed to that, clearly, and I don't think I need to say more than that. I do also think that I would question the business about Trump ratings boost now, and I'd like to ask, because I don't know the total figures, but certainly in 1.0, he jacked up everybody's ratings and everybody's profit margins, certainly CNN's. I'm not sure that that's the case right now. What's happening right now is the Iran war, the Venezuela intervention, actual news events are jacking up our ratings and our visibility and our relevance and our importance, which I'm still incredibly committed to, obviously, because CNN, Ted Turner, 46 years ago, June 1st, created a media revolution precisely to sort of get rid of all the special interests, precisely to be the sort of man in the middle and not have an agenda and just go and tell the stories from all over the world. And I learned from him in the first Gulf War of 1990 that we actually must cover all sides of the stories. The problem with us is now we are being weaponized by leaders in the United States, by leaders all over the world. But he said, you have to be in Baghdad. When the White House was saying, don't have your people in Baghdad, Ted, we're going to, kill them probably. And he said, no, volunteer. We have to tell all sides of the story, whether we're in behind enemy lines or not. And I want to say one more thing. The fact that Israel prevents us from going to Gaza is indefensible on every single level. So that's another threat to being able to tell the truth. Sure.
Just this question of corporate ownership, because Wall Street Journal is Murdoch-owned. How much is he a presence in your newsroom? I mean, it's a very confusing relationship that he has with Trump now, post sort of defamation suit payout and all the rest of it. And clearly he's got the appetite to support the Wall Street Journal on its Epstein coverage and more.
The Wall Street Journal newsroom is an independent newsroom. That's enshrined in the status it has when Murdoch bought the Journal. The decisions to publish are mine.
Yeah. So he doesn't. Yeah. Do you run any of those by him? Would you go to him with the?
Thank you.
It's fundamental.
Yeah. No. I mean, obviously, conversations happen, but that's normal in any organisation. You don't, especially if you're doing something risky that might end up in a massive, great lawsuit.
Yeah.
You're going to have conversations, but the decisions to publish are mine.
And Kathy, you are independently owned. There is no backstop for you, presumably. I mean, who is the person that watches your back?
Well, it's the trust as a whole. I honestly think it is the best ownership model you could have as an editor, because they can't tell you what to do in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, I'm sure I absolutely believe everything Emma says. But I mean, there is something unique about the Guardian's ownership structure, which is very, very liberating.
Can I ask you something? I think it's probably worth recognising that, as you said, Patrick, everyone up on the stage has, dare I say, decades of experience behind them. And there'll be people maybe sort of starting out in journalism for the first time and saying, well, it's all right for you guys. You've fought this, or you can be ugly, or you can shout about this. But maybe we should just explore that horrible moment of self-censorship in a time in your career when you did sort of think, dare I, or am I going to? Or you recognise the seeds of what it feels like to pull away from a story. And what happened? I don't know if who's brave enough to kick us off. Does anyone recognise what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, ask Patrick first, because it's your turn to talk. Do you have a
That's not how you volunteer, Christiane, just to point that out, okay? I volunteered
the honorary woman on this.
I was going to say, the gender imbalance on these panels is really outrageous.
It's very balanced.
I guess my point is there will be young people sort of starting off in their careers saying,
I was that person. So I was a freelancer for years before I was full-time at The New Yorker. And it wasn't a situation where I self-censored, and I should say that even as a freelancer, I enjoyed, all the kind of editorial protections writing for The New Yorker that a staff writer would. I will say that when I mentioned earlier getting all those letters from lawyers, these letters are designed to intimidate. Yeah. There are these firms that are now making a big business out of sending these letters before a piece has even been published. When I was working on my book about the Sacklers, my wife will chuckle hearing this. We got what's called a litigation hold, which essentially says, listen, we're planning on suing you, and when we do, you need to retain all of the documents that you have, so you can't throw anything away now and potentially indefinitely, because if you do, it'll be destruction of evidence in the eventual lawsuit that we bring. And like, when you live in a small house and you're compiling a lot of files,
this becomes
a housekeeping hazard, if nothing else. But what I would often think about and often do, I've been with the same publisher for 20 years, I've been with the same magazine for 20 years, is what happens to the person who's earlier in their career? What happens to the person who this is their first freelance piece? What happens to the independent journalist? Or, the kind of the equivalent of an alt weekly or a brand new magazine. When they get a letter from one of these firms, I think very often they are intimidated. They have to be, right? I mean, it would be sort of irresponsible for them not to think about what the consequences of such a lawsuit would be. The frustration is, I know with these firms that the ratio of letters written to actual lawsuits brought, I mean, this is a letter writing business. These people are getting paid by the word as much as the journalists are to write these letters.
That's a story that you should publish.
And that presumably gets worse in an age of AI lawyers, right? Where you can send everything you want.
Absolutely. You just kind of fire hose this stuff out. And I think that's what worries me is I often meet young journalists, aspiring journalists, students who are studying journalism. And I want to tell them, have faith, have heart. There's got to be a way that we can push this thing through. And yet at the same time, we all speak from a position of privilege here, and you don't want to kind of make it look too easy. I mean, the reality is this is hard.
So let us end by turning this on its head. We've talked about the difficulties of confronting this sort of journalism. What about the difficulties of not being fearless? Because that's kind of the end of our trade, isn't it? Kath?
Yeah, it's what we exist to do. It's what we're here for.
I mean, are there experiences where you can see things taking a nosedive if that fearlessness goes?
totally. And also, it's what people are willing, I hate to be sort of commercial about it, but people aren't going to pay for news when knowledge is a commodity, which it is now, and you can find out anything just by typing into a large language model. We have to be telling people things they don't know. So if anything, I think the kind of journalism of the future is going to be much more that there's this sort of investigations, on the ground reporting, exclusive analysis. That has to be what we're doing, or people are simply not going to pay us.
Right. It's all the things that AI can't do. AI can't do those things. It can't really talk to people, not in an intimate, thoughtful, deep way. You know, it can't go to places. It can't find things out. It can't hold the powerful to account. You know,
and I would just say it's always been thus. To all the young people who are out there, we've always been hammered by power. Its question is how do we respond? And we must keep our spine, and we must not fold, because, as you say, that's what they pay us for. But I would say in terms of life and death, we have to keep being fearless. I always say that the fact that we were in Bosnia for all those years of the war under ethnic cleansing and genocide, we told the story, and eventually it did bring a humanitarian...
We now continue our live coverage with journalists and authors speaking at an investigative journalism summit. You're watching live coverage from London here on C-SPAN 2.
New York is talking this week about the image one magazine put on its cover.
A complicated message about cops and police brutality.
A Tennessee school board has banned the critically acclaimed graphic novel Mouse.
I never thought I would live to see something where America, which saved my parents after the war, could be tilted toward a new kind of fascism.
So, welcome my beloved friend, Art Spiegelman. You know, when I took over the New Yorker, I was determined, as well as to sort of changing and, sort of radicalizing the approach editorially, that one of the things I really wanted to do was to sort of shake up the covers, because until then they'd been these very sort of polite scenes on the cover of sort of Connecticut, picket fences and barns and things, and they were a complete snooze fest. And I thought, who can I get to just be transgressive? And then I realized, of course, that Art Spiegelman had just won the Pulitzer Prize. And this was 1992, and I started dialing around, trying to get your phone number, and the rest is history. Art joined the New Yorker and became an absolutely integral, important part of the whole kind of revamp of the New Yorker that I took over. So it's so good to have you with us.
Thank you. When I first met Tina, she was saying, I never grew up with the New Yorker. I didn't care about it much one way or the other. And I said, yeah, me too, except for some of the cartoons. So it was a perfect folie à deux to change the magazine.
Now, that's not a very attractive anecdote, actually.
That's okay. It made a better magazine.
It did make a better magazine. By the way, are you vaping?
I am indeed.
Okay. Well, that's... Don't tell anybody. So, your first cover for my New Yorker was the 1993 Valentine's Day cover, which was just about 4 months after I got there. And it had didn't expect the seismic reaction that it had, but it really, really did. And why do you think that it had such an extraordinarily kind of explosive reception?
I don't know. I didn't even know I was being transgressive. It was just like puffing on this e-cigarette. But it was in the wake of the Crown Heights riots, where the West Indian Jamaican community and the Hasidic community in that part of Brooklyn came to blows, and it was really a horrible scar on the city. And that was the time when I was being asked to sit down and do a cover, and I was looking through them, and they work with holidays a lot. There's a Christmas cover, a Valentine's cover, that was coming up. And then I was just doodling, so I was drawing that guy with a monocle, Eustace Tilley, and just trying to see what could come out of focusing on the New Yorker's central figure. And just by doodling, at some point I added a beard and a Hasidic hat. And I didn't know what I was making even, but it was, oh, that's nice to look at. And then having them kiss and make up these two sides of the community, I thought that's nice. Valentine's Day, the two sides should kiss and make up. Instead, it was sort of like worse than anything Trump stumbled into, you know. It was, I was in Florida at the time for an opening of a show of my work in a museum that was having a cartoon show. And then I'm in the hotel room with my wife and kids, and Maury Pearl, the then publicist for it, says, okay, just pack up and come up and don't speak to anybody. So I had no idea what was going on, but I was following orders, and we show up at the lobby of the airport, and we're surrounded by hundreds of journalists, just everybody who could fit into that space. And I didn't even know what I was being asked about. It just looked like me, my wife, and my kids were all trying to escape to Cuba. And the questions were appropriately organized in that direction. And it turned out that as a result, it did in one blow what you were doing inch by inch already, which is how do we make people pay attention to a magazine that's decades old and seen as not seen as transgressive, seen as serious. It did stuff about Hiroshima and so on, about conservation with Rachel Carson. But I didn't know what I was getting into. It was just, that looks nice. But the way it got in was because you had another image by a friend of mine, Charles Burns. And it was another competitive picture for the anniversary cover of Eustace Tilley. He drew something so monstrous. I can't even explain it. If you haven't seen it, you have to look it up on the internet or something. But as soon as it was shown to the other editors, they exhaled and said, oh, okay, as long as you don't use that one, use this. It's fine.
So what do you think it is that a cover like this can do that a text piece can't? I mean, what is the sort of goal when you do a picture like that?
The goal is to make something that's interesting to me and then hopefully to others. But the reason that these things work so well is an image with an idea in it just is exactly what you have in your brain. Before you turn it into words or pretty pictures or whatever, it's how ideas fuse together with something visual and something conceptual. And that's been a guiding light for how covers should work when they're not barn doors.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I mean, I have a print of your next cover hanging in my apartment because it is one of my favorites. The New Yorker had never done a fashion issue before, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of apply the New Yorker lens to the sort of world of fashion. And I must say that, I mean, Art Spiegelman wouldn't have been the first person that you would think might do a fashion cover, but I thought, well, why not, give it a go with Art? And he came back, I just love this cover. And what was in your mind when you did this? I mean, I just love these rather
what is she thinking?
overweight.
A fashion cover? Are you kidding? Well, I think what was really in my mind was how do I acquit myself in these both directions? So drawing fashion is not one of the first things I sit down to think about, but by thinking of what it is to be watching somebody half naked on a runway and all these people just like being able to sit judgmentally, flipping the script and having all the naked people in the audience, made it more interesting. And those kind of shoes, you'll know what the name of the shoe designer
was. Was it the Manolo Blahnik's shoes?
Yeah. So I didn't even know what it was called, but I did know that those things were around. And I think that's striking to have in a foreground. So it came together without that much trouble conceptually, but I must have done 40 drawings before I found it.
I know.
I usually only do about 35. This was...
Yeah. Well, I absolutely adore it. And then just to, we'll stop talking about the covers in a minute, but the next cover that caused me untold problems.
Oh, before we go on, there's something I wanted to tell you about the Hasidic cover.
Oh, what was that?
Letters were coming into the magazine about that cover, very irate. And there's one letter about the cover that came from a young girl, and the person was sorting through this. You gotta see this one. And there's this kid just saying she thought it was really sweet that on Lincoln's birthday there would be a picture of Lincoln kissing a slave.
Well, that's...
So you have to have a certain amount of information in your head to make sense of these fused images. Sorry, I was interrupting.
No, I mean, we had an Easter cover coming up, so, I said to Art, we need an Easter cover. And I didn't expect him to do a crucified Easter bunny on a tax return, okay? I mean, I knew when I saw this cover, I just thought, oh, God. But I also had this kind of inner commitment, a sort of macho sense that I was going to always stand behind, Art Spiegelman, even though everyone in the office was saying, we can't publish this, we can't publish this. I can't possibly tell Art that I can't publish this cover. I've got to publish this cover for Art, I can't do it. So there we were, tax return, crucified bunny, out it went into the world. And I mean, I got like 1,000 sort of pain, sorrowful, well-written letters that hurt your heart from miserable Catholics, all over America, just sort of asking me why I would do such a terrible, sacrilegious, awful thing. I felt like such a heel. It was awful. And David Remnick, who was actually at that point a writer in the magazine, was sort of looked out of the window of his office and he saw this huge kind of mass of people walking down Broadway, and he freaked out and he thought, they're coming for us, It turned out to be an Easter parade, actually. But
yeah, a lot of police on that line as well.
A lot of police.
But the only reason you got it is because you were asking me, like I was not handing in things every week, but I was under contract. Just show me what you're thinking about. So I figured, okay, Easter's coming up, I'll show you what I'm thinking about. I never dreamed you were going to run it. I just wanted to show you what I was thinking.
I did not know this until I ran into you the other day.
Yeah,
I know. And you actually told me after all this misery that you didn't really think I was ever going to publish it. So, I mean,
Wait, there's another anecdote connected to that that's worthwhile, which is, at that point, Maury Pearls again just said, drop everything. I know you're in Paris. Could you please come back immediately? And so they got me on, what was it called? The Superjet that was around for a while in France. The Concorde, yes. So going on the Concorde back with mostly basketball players. And it was mainly to be on an afternoon news show that Maury had set up. And they had me on the show, and they had some Father Coughlin kind of guy, whatever, next to me. And he's going on about what a sacrilege it is and whatever. And then the microphone is turned toward me and said, what do you have to say to Father Coughlin? And I said, mea culpa. And she just dragged me off the stage. That was the end of my interview tour.
So I've just had a message from the management here saying, you are not allowed to smoke. So are you going to get me into as much trouble as the Easter Bunny?
She knew nothing about it. I just do this everywhere I go. And it's got a very mild vape coming out of it. You'll never smell it, even in the first row. But I need it to be able to think.
All right, well, I don't know what's going to... You may get rushed on the stage.
Okay, mea culpa.
So let's go to the genesis of your most famous, sort of revered work, celebrated work anyway, which is Mouse. And, your parents endured and survived, the horror of Auschwitz. Talk about what it was like to grow up in that household, because you had a pretty dark childhood, frankly.
Yeah, I did. Well, both parents survived at that time, and they hung out with other people that was their social set, basically. So I grew up with it as a kind of dark fact of life that I didn't know that much about. But I felt all the effects, like I think in the promo here there was something about him waking up screaming, which he would. And my mother was always nervous. If he went out of the house to work, she would be standing by the window like a dog waiting for a master to come home where it would be safe again to be in the house. So there was that. There's a little photo in their bedroom that had been blown up to be a big photo of what would have been my brother had he lived, and that was kind of a shrine spot in the bedroom. And one of the problems I had was they had the son they wanted. What were they doing with me? And it wasn't that clear. So there was a kind of sibling rivalry with a sibling I couldn't...
And what happened to your brother?
What happened to him?
Yeah.
He got poisoned by my aunt when they thought they'd sent him to safety, and it was clear that household was being sent to the death camps. So my mother's sister gave cyanide to her kids, to herself, and to my brother.
It's an unbelievable story, actually.
And the other people all died, of course.
Yeah.
Anyway, the ones in that household.
I mean, it's such tragedy. And out of that, you created a comics masterpiece. And you turned to draw Mouse, which took you how many years?
13.
13 years. And Mouse showed the world really for the first time that comics could address the most profound of subjects, which is, of course, the Holocaust. And it was also met with a barrage of people who said that to portray, the Holocaust survivors and victims as mice was absolutely the worst expression of bad taste.
Mm. Yeah, but, I backed into this. I didn't know how it was. I didn't know it was coming. It was just, at some point, underground comics, which was my natural domain, were there to be transgressive, and it led to a kind of autobiographical set of comics, and that kind of inched me into doing this 13-year-long thing. And the main metaphor I had was, when I was trying to draw people, it all looked fake, because I don't know what everybody looked like. I could look up a building or a gate of a concentration camp, but I couldn't know what everybody looked like, so I was looking for masks, for a way to neutralize it so that the story would take place on a relatively blank visual with the ideas filling it out. In other words, that mouse is just a little triangle. It doesn't look like a real mouse, it doesn't even look like Mickey Mouse, but it's a blank spot. And I was inspired by, there was a comic strip called Little Orphan Annie in the 1930s, and instead of eyes, they just had like poker chips for eyes, blank chips. And I realized that that was the most emotional comic strip I was reading when looking back through the history of comics, and that gave me a cue to make the faces as close to looking like Little Orphan Annie's eyes as they could, so that you would project yourself inside the image and make it work that way. And I just got there because basically, Zyklon B, that was the gas in the concentration camps, it was a pesticide. So rodents are pests, and what chases rodents? Cats. So it was a dumb metaphor that I wanted to deconstruct and destroy while telling a story that you had to believe in.
I did not realize the pesticide link in your mind. I think that's an extraordinary thing to know. And of course, it was such a success, right? I mean, it became such a phenomenon. It's taught in every school. It won you the Pulitzer Prize. I mean, you were just, it was amazingly successful. It still is. But it became like the sort of the rodent on your shoulder, right? I mean, you could
I've been chased by a 500-pound mouse ever since. And no matter what I do, it's good, but it's, it's good. But your other stuff, I don't know, it's kind of strange. But mouse is great. Nothing else like it. And I got this line from Joseph Heller that helped me through it. It says, "Yes, but what is?"
Yeah.
So that was useful.
Well, I'm also a huge admirer of your brilliant wife, the art editor Françoise Mouly. And in fact, I admire her so much that I hired her to be the New Yorker cover editor. So Art and Françoise became the incredible visual duo of the New Yorker. She's still in that role today, 33 years later, where she's now this iconic figure in the sort of cover world of American journalism. And her... she's here in the audience. Where are you, darling? Françoise. Okay, Françoise. How much does Françoise' artistic eye and how much is your collaboration sort of part of your own work? I mean, do you discuss...
I can't imagine of even starting... I wouldn't even have been able to imagine starting this long 13-year project if I wasn't with somebody as intelligent and as willing to deal with my darker side, let's say. She was aiding and abetting. Plus, when I first met her, she was in architecture school in France playing hooky in New York. We'd gotten together. She'd seen some comics of mine, called me, and we spoke for 4 hours on the phone because she wanted to know about that comic strip about my mother's suicide. So even though she hated the phone and could barely speak English, maybe that's why it took 4 hours, but we were on the phone for a very long time. And after that, she was staying with me, and I was trying to make, it's now ancient history, but in order to make a cover, in those days, you'd make overlays, kind of ruby lith and stuff, and there's a red, a cyan, and a yellow, and on a black line drawing. And she got fascinated by that, and I had to go off to do a day's work at the bubblegum company I worked at. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'll explain it when I get back. It's too complicated." She said, "Tell me now." Okay. So I told it to her in about a 60-second crash course, and I said, "Well, I'll explain it better later." So I went off to work, came back, and she had done an impeccable color separation for this thing without even a guidebook. And as I said in an introduction to another book, so gentlemen, I married her.
Well, I understand. I mean, in our Instagram sort of world, the AI world and so on, I mean, you came up through the underground comics world where there was a real kind of culture of great, these great bohemian, really, artists. Is it possible, do you think, for a young sort of comic artist today to break through like you did?
Possible, but it gets less and less likely because there's more and more stuff. Like on the internet, it's flooded with images. They last about 60 seconds. You move on to something else. Every once in a while, somebody tries to put their comic on an internet. It has to be very short, told ever shorter attention spans. But there's a great history of what was comics and still is. And every once in a while, a book breaks through and it blows your mind. So it can be done. But for a young cartoonist to have to set out as his first major try to crack the world is you have to do a 300-page book. It's ridiculous. You have to learn how to do a page first. Yeah. And so there's just a flood of things, and every once in a while these magical things happen that are brilliant. So it's possible to do, but I mean, when I was teaching, I was always telling the kids, just keep your day job, and don't try to be an illustrator unless you love illustration, because you'll never get out of it and you'll never do the work you might want to do. This is to my comics students. So I can't be optimistic about it, but the computer's a wonderful thing in some ways, and it allowed one to do color separations a lot easier. It allowed you to draw and fix drawings yourself before handing them in. But ultimately, if it keeps going in the direction it's going, you'll just have to get on your computer and say, crucified Easter Bunny, go to it.
Yes, okay, well, I very much hope that doesn't happen. So mouse also then came roaring back again, just quite recently, right? Because a Tennessee school board unanimously banned it from its curriculum in 2022, citing nudity and profanity, which just had the result of it surging back onto the bestseller list. The rodent rode high.
They did me a great favor, yes.
They did you a great favor. And, I mean, was that very gratifying?
No, I mean, it took me by surprise. The book had already been in schools for decades. But it's part of this thing of, whatever it was, Mothers for Decency or some organization that was literally attacking libraries and schools and school boards to get all this stuff out and put in wholesome things. And when I was asked on the I had to get up really early to be on a morning news show by video, and they were unhappy that I was vaping, but they couldn't stop me. I was at home. And basically, I was just stunned by what had been done. I said, I guess it's because, I think it's better to teach mouse in schools than just let you dive into it when you're not ready. It has a lot of, even with the mouse, has horrific images. You showed the one I don't usually like to have people see outside the context of the books, which was the Hungarian Jews in pits being burned near the end of the war. But it seemed to me if you're going to study it at all, it's good to have a study group with you. So on the news show I just explained, look, they can go home and read Mein Kampf, and their dad will just help them and read it to them. But if they're going to study it at all, read it at all, why not do it in a context? It didn't fly for the school board, but it flew off the shelves. So.
It certainly did. I mean, how do you think that a transgressive artist like you, essentially, can sort of survive in today's cancel culture world? I mean, there are so many sort of self-censoring and so many outward censoring going on. I mean, could we have done those covers now?
No.
No.
Even, when I was growing up, I was working for Playboy magazine and doing stuff for kids for the bubblegum company. But the language of comics is a language of sign systems and symbols. And all of the symbols were being wiped off the map. You couldn't draw, if you had to learn to draw a woman, you draw either a charwoman or a witch or a sexy woman. Those were the only three that existed. And it's not wide enough to be able to siphon down unless you have a very savvy audience seeing when you're deconstructing that imagery. And as a result, no. Robert Crumb, who's probably not only the greatest comics artist of my generation, but generations back the greatest. He's an impossible person. He grew up without friends. He had a brother who forced him to become a cartoonist when they were both kids. And as a result, he was an explorer of inner space. And that meant I have this weird image in my head of this monstrous, white-lipped, Al Jolson-like creature. And I said, well, if it got in there, I should put it out. Like it got into his head from somewhere. He didn't invent it. And that was part of the story. And it was another reason, in fact, why Mouse got invented, because I was looking at some old animated cartoons with a mentor of mine, Ken Jacobs, a filmmaker, who pointed out that Mickey Mouse was a jazz-age mouse in the 1920s, and he had a white face and black head. So he was basically a black cartoon character passing for white in a certain way. And those things are part of a language that have to be used, and contained and worked with, but Crumb kept crossing the line over and over and over again, and he couldn't help himself because it wasn't all he drew. He drew some magnificent pieces about what's going on in modern America, how his architecture changed from rural life to urban life with a toxic present, and on, as well as his sex fantasies, and that's pretty much overshadowed the entire achievement, which is really large. And so he's still at it. He said, I stopped drawing women. They don't like it when I draw women. So on the other hand, he's probably, as I think Robert Hughes said, the greatest artist of human life since Bruegel. Okay. And I agree.
I tend to think that you're going to end up claiming that mantle. But before we wrap, I just want to share one of your more brilliant New Yorker covers. Not for me, you did this one for David Remnick, who is now the editor. It was after 9/11, and it has really become iconic art. I think all of us in this room remember it. I just wanted to ask you, just quickly, because we're now out of time, but, what were you thinking doing this extraordinary black image?
You're mentioning My Beautiful Wife, right? It was a collaboration. It couldn't have happened without either of us. We still argue about who did what, which is proof that it's a collaboration, I think. But basically, it was very hard to come up with a cover. The editor at the time just wanted to have a black cover, and I was working on something very different from that. And then Françoise was with her friends, and one of them said, you can only have a black cover. And I thought that wasn't a good idea, because it was just one-dimensional. So what about black on black? Because I'd been working on a color image about the towers falling a few blocks from our house, and it wasn't working. And I was stubbornly trying to make it work, because I had to draw a lot of buildings, and I don't like to draw lots of buildings. And Françoise just shoved that aside. The editor shoved that aside, and then David said, well, we should either use a photograph or something just black. And then Françoise was dismayed by that, and we said, we're going to use a black cover. I said, no, then you have to make it black on black, because the thing that was hitting me that morning was, that's one of the most beautiful days I've ever seen in New York, a bright, beautiful morning, blue, and I kept doing that and then going, that's not right, so I tried to dim it down and make something between blue and dark gray or something, and I didn't have any evidence of it, but I reconstructed it after to show Françoise, and she was annoyed that I even had it as a thing, but between us, cover couldn't have happened any other way. She's among many things, she's really good at that production stuff, and to make a million copies of a magazine with two blacks that have to be that close can only be done if she was in rapport with the production department, and those were her closest friends at the magazine.
Yeah. Well, Art, we could talk for a long time hearing about your work. I hope all of you will. Actually, Mouse is for sale in our bookshop, our wonderful Haywood Hill bookshop out there, and if any of you haven't seen Mouse for some reason, because it's, I really hope you will buy a copy, because it's just such a masterpiece, and it was a wonderful time we had together.
I'm really
and
glad
thank
to be
you
with
so
you
much
again.
for coming
Thank
to
you.
Truth Tellers.
Really.
Yeah.
Thanks.
This is the tactic. It is harassment, it's intimidation. It is meant to take our eyes off the stories that we need to be doing.
Judges sentenced former media tycoon Jimmy Lai to 20 years in prison.
Mzia Amaglobeli, a Georgian journalist and media director, was arrested in January 2025 after joining anti-government protests and sentenced to 2 years in prison.
So hello again. I'm Alessandra, editor-in-chief of Reuters, and I'm pleased, in fact, I'm thrilled and honored, I should say, that to be back to speak with two women who every day contend with and battle against the tactics that are used around the world to silence the media. Maria Ressa, she doesn't need introduction, but I'm going to introduce you anyway, one of the leading global voices for press freedom and for her work standing up to dictators and warning the world tirelessly that complacency is the enemy of democracy. She, of course, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021. Keelan Gallagher is a formidable international human rights lawyer, a fiery defender of journalists in courtrooms from Iran, Kuwait, Georgia, and more. She has secured the freedom of more than 85 wrongly imprisoned journalists, bloggers, cartoonists, and a rapper, I believe. A warm welcome. So, Maria, I mean, you know this issue firsthand, obviously, having been the target of a long legal harassment campaign as founder of the digital news organization Rappler. You took on then Filipino President Duterte for his extrajudicial killings, and you've had to post bail 11 times. I had 10, but it was actually 11 times, just to do your job. And of course, as we saw in the video, you're not alone. You know, even as media organizations have, newsrooms have had more tools to do reporting, to do their journalism, there have been ever more tools to obstruct journalists. So in the years that you have been doing this tireless work, you know, what are the trends that you're seeing? How are the tools to stop journalists or to attempt to stop journalists from doing the work? How have they changed, and what are we facing now?
Oh my gosh, so much. First of all, thank you to Reuters for doing the drug war series, right? You won awards for that as well. But look, I'm a live shot reporter. I'll do 3 points, right? The first, physically. I mean, since October 2023, this is the most number of journalists killed in Gaza, dating all the way back to the U.S. Civil War, the 2 world wars, Vietnam, Afghanistan, post 9/11, Afghanistan, right? Yugoslavia combined. So physically. The second is virtually. You mentioned, you know, I was getting, and Keelan had worked on this, I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour. And when I went to the platforms to say, you know, this is not normal, this isn't right, they were like, you're a public figure. We have a Bill of Rights in the Philippines patterned after the United States that shouldn't have been allowed, but that was in 2016. It's gotten significantly worse since then because that was AI of social media. Since then, now you have, you know, not just the chat bots, but you have agentic AI and multi-agentic AI, right? So there's like an Ouroboros, a snake eating its tail, because of, starting with the attacks against journalists, narrative warfare, which we can talk about, right? You're targeted, if you're a journalist, because you hold the line, because we determine fact from fiction, and none of the tech that rules our world is actually anchored in facts. That's 2. And the last one, which, you know, I just finished a manuscript for my next book. It's called The Fight Back. And in this one, this is the moment that I crystallized the fusion of state power with tech power. When you put this together, think infotech meets biotech, think tipping point, right? This is a time when we're not sure whether journalism will survive. Certainly all of our data is telling us it's existential for us. And do our people still have agency? But wait, so before I depress you all, it's been a decade since the attacks against Rappler began. That was when Rodrigo Duterte was elected in 2016. Keelan has been my pro bono lawyer for a very long time, so there are pro bono lawyers who are there. But I'm here. Out of the 11 cases, I still have 1 left, so I have to ask the Philippine Supreme Court for approval to travel. After the Nobel, thankfully, they give me approval to travel. And the man who tried to jail me, Duterte, is in prison in The Hague.
So, as Maria said, Keelan is her lawyer. So, Keelan, if I ask Maria something and she starts to talk, which she's wont to do, you just stop her if she can't, if she shouldn't. Really the same question to you, Keelan, which is, lawfare against journalists is not new, it's not isolated, but it's getting more pervasive. And, what tactics are you seeing that, just from the legal side, because Maria lives them, and then you have to swoop in and from the legal side and protect Maria and others?
Sure. Well, first it's worth saying that the joke about Maria is deadly serious, because although Maria is free, there is a gag order. So she's not actually able to talk about her own cases. And that's a way to silence a journalist, right? She can be on a stage, but she's restricted in what she can say. I suppose I would say we quite often at Truth Tellers have talked about the authoritarian playbook, but actually I think the authoritarian playbook is the wrong phrase to use, because there's such a blurring of the line between the tactics that are being used by authoritarian regimes and in democracies. Just in January you think about the knock on the door, federal agencies arriving because of a journalist reporting, and that's in Minnesota. So we're in a position where the line is getting very blurred. So I suppose what I would highlight are three trends that I'm tending to see in the last 12 months in particular. The first is the discrediting playbook. So the idea of undermining the journalist. So you undermine the messenger, and therefore you undermine the message. Now that ties into what Maria was talking about the sheer number of journalists who've been killed in the last year. We've seen a tactic. We're both on the board of the Committee to Protect Journalists. CPJ has been doing a lot of documenting on the tactic of slandering, discrediting and killing, and then slandering those who've died afterwards. That's also something we saw here in Europe, in Malta, in 2017. My client, Daphne Caruana Galizia's family, similarly we saw, she was discredited before her death. There was an attempt to undermine her, to dehumanise her. So it's a discreditation, dehumanising, and then it makes it easier to feed that culture of impunity. But we also see that discrediting playbook in a whole range of other cases. So Maria, for example, instead of them just going after Maria ostensibly for her journalism, she got called a tax evader. Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong got called a fraudster. Jose Ruben Zamora in Guatemala got called a money launderer. And that's very deliberate, because if you call someone a fraudster or a tax evader or a money launderer, a lot of people will think there's no smoke without fire, may believe it, and it undermines the messenger and therefore undermines the message. So that's the first thing. Second tactic, I think, is the immigration playbook. Probably don't have time to go into a lot of the detail, but it's worth saying that one of the real trends that we're now seeing is simply deporting or refusing visas, the weaponisation of visas, weaponisation of the immigration system to target people for their journalism. Again, something we've seen for many decades working in countries elsewhere, but now we're seeing it in Western democracies too. So that's a very worrying trend. And then the third one, this is not very catchy, but I would probably call it the ecosystem strangulation playbook. And the idea is that rather than just targeting the journalist, you target their support system. So you go after their lawyers, for example. You go after their sources of funding. You have bring in foreign agents laws, which target their sources of investment, for example. And if you do that, you can control the journalist. And just on the lawyers, just final point on that. I was privileged enough in 2021 to be in Oslo with Maria when she won the Nobel Peace Prize, and an absolutely electrifying speech. But right in the first minute of that speech, she gave a chilling figure, which I don't think most people are aware of, which is that in the first 5 years of Duterte being in power in the Philippines, 22 journalists had been killed. Do you know how many lawyers have been killed in that time in the Philippines? 63. So there's a real tactic where you target both the journalist and you target the lawyers too. I appreciate this is a lawyer saying, won't someone think of the lawyers? But it's an important part of the picture to undermine the journalists, to cut out their support system.
Yeah, as we saw, in the panel before about local journalism, this is even harder for news organizations that don't have a big structure behind them. So much harder, or for news organizations, like ours, that have journalists who are working in their own countries, so they don't even have a foreign government, behind them. So certainly we're seeing this. But, in your Nobel acceptance speech, Maria, you said, the more I was attacked for my journalism, the more resolute I became. But we know that for so many journalists, actually, the harassment, the intimidation tactics, it actually doesn't harden them. It silences them. We're in a room full of journalists, of media owners, of editors. How do you fight this? Those who are not able to be like you.
No, I think everyone can be like me, right? Like, actually, you begin with the people you trust. That's how, look, managing Rappler, which is a news group of about 100 people, right, was so much easier when we were under attack, believe it or not, because the mission of journalism was so clear to us. The entire organization rallied around it. And those of us who were 50 and above, I'm 62 now, and the median age in Rappler is 23 years old, so you can imagine, right? We're very young, and 63% women. They just, when the mission is so clear, you don't give up. And I think that's the first lesson that we learned, is that don't voluntarily give up your rights. I mean, this is, Tim Snyder said that, right, and other things. But for us in Rappler in the Philippines, the stories that we did when we were under attack, Reuters, again, I will go to the drug war, because the more who did it, many of you in the audience helped shine the light on what we were going through. I think without you, I may have wound up in jail, right? But what we learned during that time period, the stories we did, those are the ones that are in evidence now at the ICC, right? So the journalists have a role to play in stopping impunity, stopping accountability. But I think more than that, even as we talk about how difficult it is to be a journalist, you've heard today, all day on the stage, there is no better time to be a journalist, because the Nobel lecture, that really, she was like going through it with me at the morning before I was giving it. But in that Nobel lecture, I talked about how we're standing on the rubble of the world that was, and you have to think that that is exactly what's happening. You have to throw out the way you've done things in the past, and you rebuild. You build better. And that's what we were forced to do. I think that's what we have to do with the technology that literally is choking traffic to all our news website, right? So this is exciting in a weird way, right? Very inspiring. This is the moment at the UN General Assembly last year. The 80th anniversary of the UN, I called this an information Armageddon. Because I'm an optimist. I didn't call it an information apocalypse, right? That means the battle is over. The battle is now. So if you're a journalist today, man, this is the time to jump in.
Well, I mean, not to plug, but I am going to plug, the fellowship that we have in investigative journalism. Every year we have more and more young people wanting to do this kind of work. So I think, what you say is absolutely true. Keelan, less than 2 weeks ago, you won the freedom of the Kuwaiti-American journalist Ahmed Shihab Eldin.
We were together.
And he had been detained in Kuwait for 2 months, and the Committee to Protect Journalists, I also am on the board, was just one of the many organizations that appealed for his release. And you also represent Zia Amaglobeli, as your tag shows, the Georgian editor sentenced to 2 years in prison. The question I have for you is, how much does rallying global opinion bear weight in these cases? When is it best to drum up public outrage, and when is it best to stay silent? And we have, I can say, we at Reuters have faced this, unfortunately, many times with our journalists either being in jail or under duress. And sometimes, for us, we have seen that going public has been the right thing to do because it has, rallied rage, and that has had an effect on a government. But sometimes, actually, the best thing we've done is very quietly work behind the scenes. So talk us through, especially because this is sort of news you can use, you all folks. Talk us through if this ever happens to any of you.
Pro bono legal advice.
And of course, one of the very difficult things, many of my cases are public, but many of my cases never hit the headlines, never known, and someone quietly got returned. So it's a real lawyer's answer, but it's true. The answer is it depends. It depends on the regime. It depends on the journalist. It depends on their circumstances. So I've recently had a case which has involved someone who was being very badly mistreated in custody, was a victim of torture, had just recently been released from a situation of torture where they're very, very lucky to have survived, to being under house arrest. And actually the call for the family and for the individual in question was whether they should push it by trying to secure their release from the country, from house arrest, which might have resulted in them going back into custody. An impossible decision. And they took a decision not, in fact, to go public, even though the game changer in that case is likely to be going public, but by going public it runs a risk of them being put back inside. So that's very difficult. Ahmed, who you just saw on screen there, I can tell you if Ahmed's case was not public and there hadn't been international outrage, he would still be in prison in Kuwait. So that is an example of a case where actually, initially, there were some quiet efforts behind the scenes for a number of weeks, and once I got instructed with a very brilliant team, my colleague Kate Gibson, who's fantastic, another Irish woman with an impossible-to-pronounce name, Niamh Ní Aonghasa as well, we thought that on that case, just when we weighed up all the factors, in fact being loud and screaming from the rooftops was the right thing to do, because he's an American citizen, he's being detained in Kuwait, Kuwait is a US ally, and we knew that there would be outrage at the idea that Kuwait, attempting to present itself as being a US ally, was treating an American citizen in this way. And rightly, that's what actually ultimately got him out. The blue passport is what got him out at the end of the day. And I know that there's not a lot of love for this US administration in this room, but I can tell you on this particular case, the US administration and US officials, particularly in the Special Envoy of Hostage Affairs, are what got him home and got him out to his family. So they're examples of quite extreme different cases where it depends. You mentioned Zia Ahmed Lobeli. I'm wearing the badge here. Maria has been a great supporter of that case. I just want to mention this. So Zia is an incredible woman, another woman of a certain age, turned 50 last year while in prison. She's been in prison in Georgia since January 2025. And make no mistake, she is in prison for conspiracy to commit journalism. She is in prison because of being a journalist. And not enough people know her name, not enough people know her case. And I can tell you, in 25 years of doing this work, in every single case where you secure someone's release, it's quite simple. It involves using the leverage that you've got and ensuring that for the detaining state, it becomes more trouble than it's worth for them to continue detaining the person. And we have real power in relation to Georgia. Many of the Georgian Dream officials who are responsible for detaining her have property here in London. They've got financial interests across Europe. They've got financial interests in Canada, in the US. We have a system of Magnitsky sanctions, which we could and should be using far, far better. And if I can give a shout out to one person in the audience when we're talking about public attention, there's a brilliant young woman in the audience called Irma, who is Zia's colleague.
Batu Melebi.
From Batu Melebi. And she is here for her first trip to London, her first trip to the UK, at grave risk herself, in order to be Zia's voice while Zia is in prison. And you may see her. She's got extremely bright red hair, along the lines of your very beautiful suit, Alessandra. And the reason is, if you ask her why her hair is that colour, is because Georgia is attempting to silence journalists, to make them cower away in the corner, and she thought, what's a way in which I can be as visible as possible? And that's why she's got hair that colour, and bravo to you.
Well, maybe she can stand up for her. She's in the back. There you go. I mean, also on this point, I would imagine that for those in jail, knowing that the world is out there, you know, that we saw this with Evan Gershkovich in jail, and we had this years ago with Wallon and Chassou. They knew, you know, knowing from inside jail that you have a news organization that hasn't just abandoned you, and that the world is rallying for you for your own mental health inside and your protection and your managing it is very important.
And a really critical thing to say is all too often people think with these cases that it's just in or out, it's binary, and actually a lot of the time shining a light on the case can actually be protective. So while the person remains in custody, you know, you speak to Peter Greste, you speak to a whole range of people who were in custody and who then got out and who say that when there was a tension on their case, it was protective and it resulted in them having better conditions, it resulted in less torture, less mistreatment. So that's critical.
I'm going to put you on the spot really quickly. So in which countries was it better to stay silent?
I mean, it is complicated, because I'm sorry to keep such a, but it is complicated. But in general, it tends to be better to be loud, but not all the time. Right. And also critically, some cases you can be loud at certain times, and not at others. And, you know, I'm a big believer in the idea that sometimes the dagger on the wall in Act 1 is worth more than actually using the dagger in Act 2. Sometimes the threat of going public can be very, very powerful and can result in getting a result, particularly from a country that's interested in its own reputation management and doesn't want to be seen as a torturer, as a detainer, as an arbitrary detention regime.
I want to go back to something that you both touched upon, which is the narrative. You know, we've talked about lawfare against journalists and almost things like libel now seems almost quaint, right, compared to sort of this narrative warfare.
Yeah.
You know, how it's more difficult to battle. What is the worst that you've faced, and what is the worst that you've had to defend? Just really quickly, because unfortunately then I have one last question for you both.
This is like a live shot. So narrative warfare, right? In every country around the world, the death of democracy is death by 1,000 cuts. And the last one that's easy is 143 executive orders in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Each one of those executive orders was a content trigger online that triggered the narrative warfare. That's the first phase. The second phase, going down the funnel for the managers, that second funnel is a breakdown of the checks and balances, meaning the breakdown of institutions. We're seeing that. And then it goes down to the last one, which is strategic corruption and kleptocracy. So if you're a journalist looking at the breakdown of democracy, follow the money, right? We gotta follow the money. But sorry, on our end, look, I mean, it's been almost a decade that we've been going back and forth. I just want to say on that one, there are times when we're very loud and there are times when we're super silent.
Yeah, that's right. You know, you've often got to ensure that there's a respectable off-ramp. So sometimes you need to be quiet at key times.
Right. So we have to end. So I have a last question for both of you, which is, you know, we know, and that's why we're all here. There's no freedom without freedom of the press. And when we talk about global freedom of the press, and you touched upon this when you said this is actually a great moment to do what we do. Yeah. So what gives you hope?
Oh my gosh, so much. Look at this room, right? I think we carry the tradition, but the younger generation is stepping up. And here's please don't call me an influencer ever. No offense to influencers.
She says as she's like taking videos like the whole time.
But journalist, right? Like I'm a journalist. That is who I am. There's difference. There's standards and ethics. There's a sense of mission in everything we do. And we're willing to go to jail for what we do. We're willing to take the consequences. Sorry. What's the hope? I'm the co-chair of the UN's scientific panel on AI. We need to go to the upstream problem. It needs to be radical collaboration. News organizations, you got to stop working on your own. We need to come together to defend facts. Because when it is a battle for facts, journalism is activism.
So in terms of hope, look, you've got to be a relentless optimist to do this job and to do this job too. I'm a big believer in that old phrase, you know, they tried to bury us, they didn't realize we were seeds. What gives me absolute hope are the people who've come out, who've walked through fire and come out the other side. People like my friend Jason Rezaian, you know, people like Maria, people who've come out and now are spending all of their time campaigning for others. So those of you who were in Perugia at the International Journalism Festival a couple of weeks ago, there was Alsu Kurmasheva, you know, who was sitting in one of Putin's prisons until August 2024 when she got released, and then makes it her life's mission to go around campaigning for other people. And actually, this is going to sound like an odd thing to say, but I've got at home a treasured collection of T-shirts which I wear as pyjamas at bedtime, and they are the T-shirts which are free Person X, who's already been freed. So I've got Free Toumaj, the rapper. I've just got a new Free Ahmed T-shirt, which we never needed to deploy because we got him out, which is amazing. Free Yasser, all of those. And I'm hoping that I'm soon going to have a new T-shirt to add to my collection, Free Zia.
Well, I can say, as we conclude this panel, that my hope is ladies like the two of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pagers worn by members of the Hezbollah militia were turned into miniature bombs.
This is the lead-up to the Dubai assassination of one of the founding members of Hamas.
The Israeli military has said that it has killed the leader of Hezbollah.
Quote, eliminated in Beirut strike.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Clarissa Ward. I'm CNN's chief international correspondent, and I could not be more delighted to be sitting alongside award-winning journalist Ronan Bergman. I'm sure most people in this room are already very familiar with his work. He is a staff writer at the New York Times. He is the senior national security correspondent at Yediot Aharonot.
Very good.
I hope I pronounced that okay.
But Hebrew is improving.
But I think what he's really known for is having the most compelling insights, nonstop scoops on everything pertaining to Israel's intelligence agencies, to the point where I believe a former Mossad director actually said, quote, that your work is amazing, or your sources are amazing, but it's also a little disturbing. How effectively you have been able to penetrate a world that, for most of us on the outside, is frankly very opaque. So I think let's just start with the news, because most of us are journalists here, or many of us are journalists. President Trump intimating that the war with Iran is really basically over. Secretary of State Mark Rubio saying epic fury is done. The framework of the agreement is basically almost there. We've sort of heard this story before, but what I want to ask you about is, where does Israel stand on this? Is Israel ready to wrap this up? And do they have a seat at the table in dictating whether or not that's what happens?
So in short, I think to both your basic questions, the answer is no. After all these wonderful things that were said about me, I was looking at this, just echoing from Washington, whether from the president or leaks that I believe originated from the White House, as happened before, are a little bit too mature, to say the least. I don't think that in a framework agreement, Iran would agree at the basics of it to give up on their, on their joker, on their ass, on the main cards that they are holding, which are the diluting or the giving away of the enriched uranium, freezing the enrichment, and all of that. I think that Iran would insist that this would go to a separate negotiation that would be decided somewhere, but deciding or giving up on their main weapon at the beginning, I don't see this happening, and I think that what we will already hearing from Iran is that this is far from being over. And I think Trump is using leaks of success in the negotiation that didn't happen as a tactic in the negotiation. The second is about Israel. Israel, and this is something I think the negotiation could go this way or the other, but what would not happen is that the US would not be considering Israel opinion, not in when and not in how, on what terms Israel or the war is over. Israel is totally sidelined. It gets some updates from the US, usually when it's getting close to a ceasefire agreement, ceasefire on Lebanon agreement. But all the rest is dependent on Israel getting feed from sources all over the world about what its ally in the war is doing. And I think while Israel had a profound role, while Prime Minister Netanyahu had a profound role in convincing President Trump and his team to go to the war, while Israel and the US Air Forces shared 50-50, 60-40 on the task in the skies above Iran, when it comes to the decision on when and how to end the war, Israel is totally out of the room, not by the table. And I think this dictates back to where this is all started. And I think that it also projected the disappointment, if not from President Trump, who is very hard to read, but at least from high-rank American officials that believed that Israel promised something that it did not or could not or wasn't delivered.
So help us understand that, because from what I have been led to believe, Mossad effectively sold this to Prime Minister Netanyahu as a slam dunk. Regime change in Iran, totally doable. Here's how we do it. How did they get it so very wrong?
So I assume that if we would have someone from Israeli intelligence representing the point of view of Mossad, that person would say, we didn't get it wrong, we just didn't do it. Because we were stopped by President Trump on the verge of starting what they called phase 2, which is the Kurdish invasion into the Iranian Kurdistan. It's not the only, but it's a main component that, all the rest collapse if it doesn't happen. This was presented to the president when he had Prime Minister Netanyahu by him at the Situation Room, and they had Israeli officials on the screen of the encrypted conference call. And everything was presented to the president in many details, to which he said, according to some people who sat in the room and in the conference call, he said, okay, I got it. Now, I speak very little English, but you will tell me what's the meaning of, okay, I got it. I'm in favor, I'm against, I accept, I approve. And it turns out that not all of these parts of the puzzle were put together. And at the end, it turns out that President Trump objects launching the courts. So Mossad can say, well, they didn't let us go. If they would let us, we would be successful. If they would let us tomorrow morning, we could be successful. Others would claim that the sheer idea that an intelligence agency from afar, without boots on the ground, is able to topple the regime, such a strong regime in a country of 19 million people, almost the size of Europe, by itself is, I'm trying to look for some mild term in English, it's presumptuous.
Yes.
And I think that there was something in the successes of the Mossad that are undoubted, the Pages operation and others, that led people believe that if someone is able to run such an unbelievable operation like the Pages, he can also topple the regime in a country like Iran. And all of that has been used by Prime Minister Netanyahu to convince President Trump, who was led to believe that this is just another Venezuela.
So basically, President Trump got spun on this war by Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was spun, in a sense, by Mossad.
Well, I think that the people speaking on that call, on that meeting on February 11, believed that this is doable. I think that there were not enough other voices, not inside Israeli intelligence, not in the National Security Council of Israel, not in the American National Security Council, the CIA, the NSA, Israeli military intelligence. I think that all of them were silent. They were silent because we are talking about two regimes. So I'm not talking about the Iranians, of course. But may I ask your connection with the organizers to bring me a glass of water?
A glass of water, yes.
Can
we get a glass of water for Ronan, please?
Thank you. So if these two leaders, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, they show very little patience for anyone who says the opposite. And as far as I know, there was no one in that room or that room. And I asked people who were in the rooms in the preparations meeting between the IDF and Mossad, wasn't there anyone who stood up and said, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Sorry. Who said, why do you think that you are able to do that?
Right.
And I think that this was a combination of hubris because of the success of the pages and also lack of patience.
So, this is so fascinating to me because I was in Iraqi Kurdistan at the beginning of the war. And when I first heard this idea that it was been taken into consideration to arm the Kurds and it looked like it was happening, and no one could believe it. Everyone was like, this is so crazy. There are so many things that can go wrong. There are so many reasons this can backfire. There are so many historical lessons that have shown us this is not a good plan. And so what I'm trying to understand is what kind of intelligence, when you think of an intelligence agency and you have signal intelligence, you have human intelligence, you see these extraordinary feats, ruthless, but certainly historic, that Mossad has been able to pull off. Help us understand the kind of intelligence that goes into, for example, assassinating the former supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, versus the kind of intelligence that they're using to think, oh yeah, if we give some guns to 6 different groups of Iranian Kurds, we can overthrow the regime.
So, first of all, just to do justice, this is not just giving some arms to some groups of Kurds.
Right.
This was supposed to be a combined operation, starting with 100 hours of the two air forces of the US and Israel. It starts with killing the supreme leader. You do not kill the leader of another country unless you want to topple the regime. By itself, this is the signatory that we are looking at war where all sides are not telling the truth about its goal. Ask Israeli leaders, military, political, ask American leaders, what is the goal of the war? Now, the goal of the war was to topple the regime and instate, maybe not another regime, but another leadership that would be more favorable or more comfortable for the US and Israel. This was the goal of the war. You cannot explain the goal of the war in any other way. The siege, closing down, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. The US military brought soldiers only after like 3 weeks. Didn't they read all the textbooks of anything written about Iran? I looked at my archive. I wrote about this first time in 1997. I was not the first one. There were many, many others before and after. I assume they read the textbook that Iran will shut down the Strait of Hormuz if being attacked under doomsday scenario. Why didn't they got the forces earlier? Because they thought that this is going to last a week. And why did they thought so? Because they were sure, or some were sure, that they are going to topple the regime. And this was a combined operation of influence campaigns, of controlling some of the main media outlets that are feeding information into Iran, with the Kurds, with the aerial coverage of the US and Israel. It happens during war. It's not just then. And they were convinced that this is doable. And I think that the voices, when they saw that Mossad was able to perform Israeli intelligence, such massive, and I think this goes to some confusion that Israel is suffering from. This is between the tactical successes and looking or be successful in the strategy.
Tactical success versus strategy. So let's talk about one of the tactical successes for Israel, the killing of Khamenei. You've said that the intelligence that went into that was 3 decades in the making. I mean, help us understand, because, obviously there are so many of these sort of audacious attacks, but that was the most recent.
So I think what is striking in the ability of Israel to assassinate the supreme leader was that they started the second war with Iran, following the first one in June, in the exact same way. They realized that if you want to kill someone or someone's, they needs to be done in the first strike, because afterwards they will all be gone in a bunker. They wanted to kill the participant of a meeting that happened in the same compound, not far away, the Supreme Security Council. And only in the last minute, they realized that the Supreme Leader is sitting above ground in his compound. Now, this goes to some psychology of the Iranian side. Because any child that day, so the night between the 27th and the 28th, with any access to this meticulous espionage tool called Google, will tell you that there is a strong probability that Israel and the US would strike as they did before. And he was sitting in above ground, not even in the bunker. And why did that happen? And it's not clear. But what was clear that Israel killed some 25 Iranian nuclear scientists and military and intelligence leaders in the first minute of the operation in June. Much of that intelligence was taken from hacking and following the cell phones, not of the people they wanted to kill, because they all were deprived of cell phones, surrounded by bodyguards, but the bodyguards did not use the bodyguards did use cell phones.
They did.
So the only thing that Israel needed to do, complicated, but not that complicated, was hack the cell phones. And one of the bodyguards of one of the Iranian leaders was even leaving the location open, and he was tweeting on Facebook while on the job. And this way, even when the scientists and the military intelligence leaders were each one in very different place, Israel was able to kill all of them, attack all of them at once, 25 different places. The Iranians got that. They understood the breach, and they deprived the bodyguards from having any cell phones. And yet Israel was able to target the leaders again. And that can only happen if you become part of the foundation of the system, of the communication system, if you are there for 3 decades. If you, let's say, if you build a bunker and you are there from day one and your guys are part of the builders, you have an agent that was recruited, he can put all sorts of things into the machinery and the electronic systems that are part of that. And it goes to surveillance, but it also goes to some kinetic operations called button operation, meaning you intercept a supply chain of certain gear, certain equipment, and you either sabotage, you either put some intelligence surveillance mechanism inside it, or you put explosive.
Can I ask you what might sound like a really stupid question, but I think everybody in here probably wants to know? When we see these ridiculous, of course, Hollywood shows like Tehran, people are curious. Are there Mossad agents inside Iran? How effectively, we've talked about the technical side and we understand that, but has there been an actual penetration of the IRGC in terms of recruiting people on the ground, maybe not Israeli spies there, but recruiting Iranians to turn against their own government?
So, not long ago, I got a call from a famous European journalist, who I'm not going to name because of reasons you'll understand in a minute. And he says, Ronan, can we speak about Mossad assassinations operation in Iran? I said, sure, and we started to speak. And then at a certain point, he said, no, Ronan, I think you got it wrong. I said, okay, please explain. He said, because I saw that in the TV series Tehran, they're doing it differently. And I thought it's a documentary of sorts that I didn't. And then he said, no, the one on Apple. He said, but you know, these are actors. He said, yeah, but it's based on a true story. No, it's not. I always say that the real world of intelligence is not less interesting or more interesting than what we see in the TV series and the movies, but it's just totally different. And one of the things that now is leading the new world of intelligence is the biometric documentation. Israel has a problem with using the same kind of cover stories, legends, as it did 30 years ago. Former Mossad deputy chief, the one who captured Eichmann, Rafi Eitan, told me that in the 50s and 60s, It was so easy for us to fabricate documentation that sometimes we forge passports of countries that do not exist. And so nowadays, it's not just changing the photograph. The biometrics are embedded into the passport, but also into the framework, the computer framework of the country that produced that. Very, very hard. Very hard to have something like Tehran.
Okay.
And then you are dependent mainly on agents that are recruited from the country or the organization. And this gave birth to a new kind of agent. It's called the warrior agent. So not just a nuclear scientist recruited and just delivering information, but someone that you can make travel out of to somewhere out of Iran, get training, and he will be an active agent, a kinetic agent. And much of what we see, the vast majority of what we see happening in Iran from the ground, the drones, the stealing of the Iranian nuclear archive, much of the assassinations, the killing of Fakhrizadeh, the nuclear scientist, by all of that, much of that, almost all of that is done by Iranians that were recruited from Iran, traveling out, getting training, usually in places that are not Israel. Imagine how
The
complicated.
logistics alone. I'm conscious that we have very little time left. I have to ask you.
We're going to violate it, no?
I know we're going to violate it. I have two questions, but I'm going to try to combine into one and just try to give a very quick answer because we don't want to do too much violating. But whenever someone leaks, they have an agenda, right?
Sure.
And you are probably getting information from people all the time who have an agenda. You also have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling you an enemy of the state. You have the Iranians at one point trying to lure you into a trap to meet them in Istanbul. In 1 minute or less, how do you stay focused and keep the information straight in your head? What's the difference between spin and what's real?
These are two questions, 30 seconds each. The first one, how do you stay focused? Sometimes it's hard. You need to cover war. You need to be inside the fire, whether in Ukraine or in Gaza or in the communities by Gaza. And at the same time, you fight poison machines, propaganda machines, that all of their goal, the mechanism and their target is to try and either destroy you or intimidate you, that you do not do your job with having a critical view and a truthful view of the regime, of the prime minister. This is hard because you feel that it's all around you. It's attacking you from all sides, and it takes a minute to understand it's not all sides. It's just one side is attacking you, dressing up, covering up as if it's coming from all over. And Benjamin Netanyahu and his followers created the most powerful propaganda machine, I believe, on the face of the earth. And it's reshaping or rebranding history. If you go to any place in Israel, I'm told by experts, and you run a poll, even in good day for democracy, you'll get between 25 and 30% of people that are convinced that the Shin Bet, the Israeli Internal Security Service, who is in charge of counterterrorism, not just made a mistake, not just failed, not just had the wrong assessment, all of this is true, but they were in cahoot before October 7 with Hamas. Their chief was in cahoot with Yahya Sinwar in order to spoil it for Bibi, and they planned together October 7. Now, this is totally nonsense. You get 30% believing in that, and 100% of the 30% are the direct result of the conspiracy theories that were spread by the poison machine of the followers of Benjamin Netanyahu. So this is one, to stay focused. This is a very good question, and this is the most important thing. The other one about sources spinning you, I would say suspect always, corroborate always. And in many cases, this is really my luck and my honor to be part of the New York Times team, where We work in teams.
Yeah.
We have people communicating not just with me, with Israeli intelligence, but we have people are in touch with sources in Hamas, in the Revolutionary Guards, in many other parties that are, part of the coverage. And my great friend and colleague Farage Fasihi, who's covering the IRGC, our great pleasure is that she brings the reporting from the IRGC, and it totally matches what I bring from Mossad independently. So we say that the only place on earth where Israeli intelligence and the IRGC can work together is the New York Times.
Ronan Bergman, thank you so much.
Thank you. What do you say to the...
We're in a weird world where this is going to be the definitive electoral event.
I think that your party as a national project is dead.
MPs all want some action.
General election.
You're joking. Not another one?
Never gets
I feel like that.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us. Yes, possibly coming soon. This last session, brilliantly titled The Hounds of Westminster, I don't know who that's referring to. That's us or them, but we'll get to that in the course of this conversation. My name's James Harding. I'm the editor of The Observer, and as the founder of Tortoise Media, and the reason that I'm here is that Harry Evans was the inspiration for that and was the person who enabled that to happen, and his example, as we saw right at the beginning of the day, both as a joyous practitioner of journalism but as a dogged one who believed in taking time, was the person who really inspired us to take a different route in journalism and reporting. And I say that because there is a lovely symmetry to this day, that the last panel conversation, begins with Gabriel Pogrund, who anyone in the UK knows is one of the best, possibly the best investigative reporter covering power in this country, and has just been promoted to lead the Insight team, which was itself Harry's creation. So it's brilliant, Gabriel, to have you here. If journalism means anything at all, it means loving the question. And Beth Rigby, I think it is fair to say, if you watch Sky News, in fact, you don't even need to watch Sky News for Beth, you seem to be everywhere. On social media, your questions, more than any others, seem to dominate the conversations. And Beth, Sky's political editor, is joining us too. And we have Michael Gove, who I worked with when he was in the newsroom at the Times. He then took a small detour for a decade or more, served longer than anyone else in British cabinets over the course of the coalition and Conservative governments, and then returned to your true calling as a journalist and now the editor of The Spectator. So please welcome our panel. I know that usually we do those quick-fire questions right at the end. Can we start with a quick-fire question? In fact, two. Will there be a leadership contest within the next week, at least triggered within the next week? And who will be Prime Minister this time next year? Michael, you first.
No, and Keir Starmer.
Ooh.
Beth.
I hate doing quick fire. I like a qualified answer. My answer to the first one will be, I don't think so. And I've actually just come back from, this is not quick fire, it's like, shut up, Beth, get on with it. I've actually just come back from interviewing Lucy Powell, the Deputy Labour leader in Manchester. And she's told me very clearly that she's going to back Starmer, whatever the results of this election. And that's very telling, because what that tells you is that it looks like the party, and certainly the soft left, or big chunks of it, are biding their time. So to the first question, I would say no. To the second question, I'm not sure. Lucy Powell also talked a lot about Andy Burnham coming back into Parliament and how she would like this extremely popular, as she put it, politician back in. And I think that there is a settled view amongst the Cabinet in Westminster that Starmer will not lead the party into the next general election. So then it's a case of when do they move? So I don't know on the second one. It could be that Andy Burnham, I think, would be the most likely.
of all the candidates at the moment, but he's got the small problem of getting back into Parliament. That's more complicated than he might like it to be.
Gabriel, leadership challenge in the week, and who next year?
So I know we've dwelled a lot today on the threats that journalists face, so I wish to be self-aware in saying I know that following does not count as real harassment or intimidation of reporters, but Keir Starmer said something quite mean about me not that long ago. It was that he described the thesis of a book I'd co-written with my colleague Patrick Maguire, which portrayed Starmer as the monkey to Morgan McSweeney's organ grinder. He described its central thesis as bollocks, and I think with the passage of time there might be something more to that, in that I think it is possible that he wasn't just the plaything of Morgan McSweeney. He wasn't the passenger at the front of McSweeney's DLR. He's the passenger at the front of the DLR, or the train that is being driven by whoever holds power in the Labour Party in a given moment. And I think the soft left of the Parliamentary Labour Party, they have reasserted themselves. They have established, as they often have, that they are the centre of gravity in a party. They're going to dominate its next phase. And I think they may end up determining that keeping Starmer where he is, but bringing to bear on his project and bringing him to the left, is a more bloodless and efficient way of exercising control over British politics. And I'm just going to steal Beth's answer and say on the second one, I don't know.
But what you're basically saying is most likely not a leadership contest within the next week, and very possibly Starmer this time next year.
Very possibly, but yeah, the reason is I think that there are too many collective action problems, and in the end, one thing that the PLP can agree on is this Starmer guy is he's open for doing business with us. You know, we learned that from winter fuel, from welfare reform.
Right.
He is open for business in ways that conviction politicians like Blair may not have been, possibly to his own detriment in the end.
So can we step back and just talk to begin with about the relationship between politics and journalism? And Michael, actually I wanted to ask you, thinking about your past life and thinking about your colleagues as politicians, because I suppose many journalists would say, actually, if you look at investigative journalism, accountability journalism in Westminster, in the UK, you look at what happened to Boris, you look at the investigations into Sunak, you look at, the Mandelson story, the Harborne story. Accountability journalism seems in rude health, but others might say, actually, no, it's just a blood sport, what's happened in Westminster. The press is just trying to pull people down. When you were a politician, did you feel as though the press stopped Britain from being well governed?
No. I was paranoid. I occasionally felt that the coverage was unjust. I sometimes found myself uncomfortable reading accounts of things, sometimes because they were stunningly accurate, at other times because they were close to invention. But overall, if one takes a step back, the coverage was fair, probably analytically more rigorous and more challenging than in almost any other jurisdiction. And actually, I was a minister during the coalition years. During those years, a very, for this generation of British politicians, novel arrangement with people who were in an arranged political marriage worked for those 5 years, because the people at the top were high quality.
And Beth, you must hear this all the time, that, that Westminster journalism, lobby journalism, is just not serious. It's a game of gotcha. Fair or not?
I don't think it is fair. I think part of the challenge is that politics has got faster, news cycles have got more intense, media organisations have proliferated as platforms have grown. And I remember when I first started working at the FT a very, very long time ago, you would hopefully get a good story, you'd hopefully get it on the front page, everyone would go to bed, and in the morning it would be on the stands, and there you had your scoop, you had your front page, your job was done. It has just completely transformed now. And the reason I talk about that is I think that there's more of a pressure cooker mentality. I think there's more pressure, there's more intensity. But actually, if you look at what happened, be it in the Johnson regime when that whole government collapsed eventually, or what's happened to Starmer. The fault lines of the government isn't journalists making mischief. It's actually take Starmer. It's the mistakes of Starmer's administration, be that to say they're not going to raise taxes in a manifesto and then bung 25 billion on business with the fallout that creates, or not alerting the public to winter fuel and then doing that, or deciding to cut welfare by 5 billion to try and help the Chancellor with the public finances, but not sell that to your party. And actually, really, what journalists are doing, and I know sometimes this sort of charge gets made towards us, but we're just reporting and reflecting what's actually happening in politics. I mean, the Prime Minister has changed his Chief of Staff, twice, 3 times? His Communications Director, 4 times? He's had, 3 political directors, all in the space of 18 months to 2 years. And all of you working where you work know that when you have that much churn, that there's problem and dysfunction, and actually journalists are reflecting that.
There's a different case Gabriel made against the lobby, which is that's not where the stories are. That there's a problem with the access of the lobby, and the best investigative work happens outside it. Now, you've broken some big stories, and you have been, to an extent, outside it. It was interesting this morning, Emma Tucker was talking about one of her journalists being expelled from the lobby, and how much better his work got as a result of that. So what do you think is the answer to the question of where the best stories lie in politics?
Great question. I mean, I don't have any monopoly on wisdom in response, but I will say that I think the beauty of the lobby system is that it gives you proximity that can, when at its best, lead to stories that otherwise wouldn't have come out. So I feel, I mean, this conference is such a brilliant event because it's remedying the long-term predicament of the British press, which is that sometimes I think we lack confidence to tell stories about ourselves in a way that our American colleagues do. But Partygate is a really good example of the story which, occasioned the collapse of the British government, and that would not have happened were it not for the incredibly tightly wired relationships that exist between the political class and journalists. So I think when done well, it can work brilliantly. I think when done poorly, I just think it can. I don't think this is particularly. I don't think this is a dissident opinion. It can just get so boring. We've been asking the same question about Starmer's fate for so long. The only one thing I'll say is that Starmer himself has given effect to that situation by, because of some of the reasons that Beth just alluded to. He has so often failed to have a story to occupy us, and also to rebut the charge that he is an empty vessel, that there is no substance at the heart of the political project. I think we are quite good, possibly in the lobby. The lobby can be quite feral, and it can think and act as a pack, but when it does sense weakness, it magnifies that weakness. And when it sees strength, maybe incorrectly, it magnifies that strength.
So can we talk, I mean, it's interesting you say that about the US, and you're right. We often look kind of longingly at the US and the culture of journalism and the heroics of American journalism.
Who we'll talk about in just a second, Walter.
It's also true that right
CNN,
now, I think
as some of you might have seen already, we've just had the news as Walter and I were waiting off stage that Ted Turner, legendary founder of CNN, his death has been announced in the last few minutes.
And he is up there with Harry in being fearless, the most fearless journalist I've ever seen.
How did you experience that?
He was fearless when it came to his corporate overlords, when Time Warner bought him. He was fearless when it came to political leaders who tried to push back on him. I can remember in 2011, when the Twin Towers get hit, Ted had been kind of banished upstairs at CNN Center because the corporate overlords at Time Warner didn't want him meddling with it. But when we were watching the towers go down in that newsroom, I said to our news editor, excuse me a second, I'm going to have to go upstairs. And there was Ted alone in his office. And I said, Ted, you got to come back. He said, well, I'm not. I said, no, I'm asking you. Come to the newsroom. This is why you created this network. And he brought a Confederate sword he had hanging on his wall. And he rallied us. And he said, journalism is made for times like this.
But it's interesting that he had respect for the boundaries. So until you went to get him, he needed you to ask him to come down at that particular moment.
It was such a sad thing when corporations take over great media empires. They sometimes need to exert control. When you have a founder like Ted, he was just the heart and soul of the place. And you can find it in all corporations. When the founder gets replaced by the suits, it's always a problem.
Well, on that note, are you concerned about the future of CNN today?
I haven't focused on it too much because I don't quite know where it's going to end up. I hope somebody benevolent buys it, but also the benevolent owner model is not always a perfect one.
Yeah. So then let's go to Harry Evans, your first editor, the person who hired you, and you had the start of your career right here in the UK at the Sunday Times.
About 6 blocks from here on Gray's Inn Road, in the Blue Lion pub.
You know, apart from some...
Our newsroom.
Well, those were the days. That's like a whole different story of the days when drinking and journalism were,
We could spend the entire 15 minutes on that one.
But... amongst the eminent people who are here, there are lots of journalists who are early in their careers. There are people who are aspiring to a career in journalism. So with Harry being your first editor, what did you learn from him? What did he teach you that has stayed with you?
In journalism back then, there were two types of journalists. Those who had great access. If you were in Washington, it was Scotty Reston and Hugh Sidey and people like that. And then there were the great investigative journalists who told truth to power, like Woodward and Bernstein. Harry taught us that you could do both. He was somebody who was totally plugged in, but whether it was the thalidomide stories that were happening then in the 70s or anything else, he would always put the reader in front of his desire to be connected.
And how did you experience that on a day-to-day basis with stories?
I can remember the time when he just left a blank hole in the front page because the courts had told him he couldn't do a thalidomide story. I also just remember he would send us all over the place and just push us. And there was something important, if I could raise the Insight team, because I think that did something new in journalism, which is being tough and creative is a team sport, a collaborative effort. And I remember doing a story once, I won't get into it, but it was up in Dundee with David Blundy and somebody else. And we were looking for this front page byline, and the Sunday the paper comes out, it just says, by the Insight team. And I realized you were more proud if he put the Insight team label on it than if he had put your name on the story.
So there was an ego lesson there.
Well, it was also that journalism is a collaborative effort. Yeah. Don't think it's all about you. And this is a problem journalism faces is the reporter thinks it's about the reporter.
Yeah. And I wonder then, this point about access but retaining your journalistic distance and scrutiny, is that again something that has stayed with you when you work on something like this, where your subject, your biographical subject, is not only alive but very powerful, and you have had the kind of access that allows you time with them? Is that the kind of lesson that's stood you in good stead?
Yes. The fact that the people I've written about are very powerful, whether it be Steve Jobs or Musk or others, that's not intimidating. But I'll be honest, the thing that compromises you is if you do get very close to somebody, if you spend 2 years with them. It's not that I'm afraid that Elon Musk would do something to me with billions of dollars, but you get to know somebody so well, you have to force yourself to write things they're not going to like. And whether it's a Steve Jobs book or this book, there's a lot of things in it. But one of the things I go back to Harry that I learned from him, I remember once a story, nobody will remember, but there was a fire at an amusement park in the Isle of something, Summerland it was called. And I had to cover it, and I realized that they had locked the exit doors with a chain, so people had died. And I'm writing this story, and the guy, Sir Charles Forte, I think it was Forte, who owned it all. I ended up flying back on the same plane, and he started talking to me. And when I got back, I was so worried that, okay, I was about to write a story that was going to really hurt this person. And Harry just said, you got the story, go with it, put aside your emotional feelings.
It's an immense amount of time to spend with a person.
And it felt that way.
2 years.
Yeah, it didn't go quickly.
What was it like? Let us into
Well, he's insane. He's not, but so was Ted. Look, if we're going to talk about the great Ted Turner, you spend time saying, is he crazy or is he crazy like a fox? And Elon Musk has a demon mode that's deeply unattractive. I mean, he just gets really dark and conspiratorial.
Do you mean losing his temper, or more just...
No, Grimes, his girlfriend, or one of his whatever, Claire Boucher, called it demon mode. And what would happen is suddenly he would go dark. And you could see it happen. I remember one of the first times I was at a restaurant dinner, Grimes was next to me, and suddenly somebody says something to Musk, and she goes, demon mode. I said, what do you mean? She said, watch it, it's about to hit. And boom, he just went dark and mean and ugly on people. And he had both sort of an engineering mode, where he talked to you about exact heat shield on the Raptor engine. He had a giddy, funny mode, but he'd get into demon mode, and that made it difficult.
And were there times along the way where you thought, what have I started? Should I be...
Yeah, no, I always was looking for the exits, the exits. I was like, because when I started with him, he had just brought us into the era of electric vehicles. Tesla sold 1 million electric cars, more than all the other companies by far combined. He had brought the astronauts up to the space station back, brought us into the era of having Starlink, everything. I said he must be riding high. And I thought it was going to be successful, interesting engineer story. And I said, you must be riding high. And he said, it's like a games I play, like Elden Ring had just come out. I got to get to the next level. I have to drive myself. I'm not going to be sad. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm secretly buying Twitter stock. And you could realize that he was going to go down that rabbit hole.
Do you think he saw Doge as just that, another level? And do you think he'll never admit to it, but do you think he's been burnt by that experience?
Oh, he has been burned, and he knows he's been burned, and he will admit to it, but not soon.
And what do you make of where he is on politics these days? Because about a year ago, in fact, almost exactly a year ago, I interviewed him on stage. It was not like this. It was a remote interview, and still the time.
Yeah,
it was. I was in Qatar. He was.
Yeah, I was in the Qatar. Yeah, okay.
On the West Coast, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was a very difficult experience. And
he's not charming.
No, and I don't think he likes journalists very much at all. And I don't think he gets questioned in that way very much at all. I mean, at one point he said, you ask interesting questions. At another point, he told me I was a non-player character. So there was kind of it was a mix of things. But what I really wanted to ask you is, in that conversation, he said he was done with political spending. We now know that didn't last, because campaign filings show that he's making political donations.
Yeah, not much. I don't think he's deeply into politics right now. But he has his definite, populist, somewhat conspiratorial mindset, where it's on immigration or anything else, and he, will be posting about it. I suspect he was so burned by the, not just Doge, but by the White House, that he'll be giving some money, but I think it'll be a while before he throws himself back into politics.
Okay, and maybe not on the scale ever that he spent on getting President Trump elected, which was massive. So your other subjects who have included, for your biographies, Walter, they've included Einstein, Kissinger, Steve Jobs, Jennifer Doudna, the biochemist who's behind CRISPR gene editing. I'm leaving Benjamin Franklin aside because I think he's a special case and we'll come to him separately. But what is it that links these people? What is it that you're looking for when you decide to invest this much time and energy?
They're smart people, but, you've been in this trade as much as I have. Smart people are a dime a dozen. They don't usually amount to much. What matters is being imaginative, creative, thinking out of the box. And I kind of wandered down this path when I did Ben Franklin, then Einstein, and then Jobs, who said, do me next. And I'm like, all right, Ben Franklin, Albert Einstein, you arrogant little... but then I said, I'll do you when you retire in 30 years. And somebody said to me, no, he hasn't told you, he hasn't even told his board, but he got diagnosed the day before he took a walk with you, so you got to do them now. And that's when I started thinking, why do I do these books? And I asked him, I said, what? He said, because you like standing at the intersection of technology and the arts, of the humanities and the sciences. And that's where creativity occurs. So I have a lot of friends, like John Meacham or whatever, who write about presidents and people who write about powerful people. I've always liked to write about creative people, technological, scientific mindset.
Hence the next one.
Marie Curie, who's the final person you need to get us into the 20th century, because she had a great life, of course, but she's the one who she's the only person ever to win a Nobel in 2 sciences. She wins with physics and then chemistry. And basically, she's proven that chemistry is just physics. It's how do the particles radiate from the nucleus and change elements.
So as you look around our landscape today...
And I do, by the way, like going from live people to dead people back. That's why we're doing Marie Curie.
Okay, so I'm going to take you back to live people. Who living is a subject intriguing enough for you to do?
AI we're in the middle of the story. Sebastian Malaby's just done a very good book on Demis Hassabis. I think every day I hear new people are doing books on Sam Altman. I'm certainly watching the Sam Altman, Elon Musk trial testimony coming out. But I actually am one of those people who's a deep believer in AI, but I also don't think it's that big of a deal yet. I think it's in the chatbot phase. And real-world AI, when it can actually see and move and do physical things, is when we're going to get to the quantum leap. And so I'm waiting to see how that will play out, but I'm not, don't have anybody. I'm thinking, too, of space travel, which is going to be the next big thing. So I'm thinking of a lot of things.
Would you do Donald Trump?
Oh, God, no. I don't do, no.
Well, I mean, you did Kissinger. I know that's not a politician in that kind of way. But...
Well, Franklin was the closest to a politician, No, I wouldn't want to, no.
Okay. That's pretty definitive. Okay, so in our last few minutes, I'm going to turn to your most recent book. So it's a real difference in size.
And I did something short for a change.
The Greatest Sentence Ever Written. It is linked to America's forthcoming 250th anniversary. The sentence being the second sentence, or very long sentence, of the Declaration of Independence. I am going to turn to a page towards the middle, which taught me something.
By the way, we hold these truths. If
yes,
I don't remember what's the second sentence.
Yes, I should have said that. But I'm going to turn to an aspect of the book which told me something about Benjamin Franklin that I didn't know, and which I thought, given that our title has been Headlines in History, speaks to the lessons that we can take away from the past. It's where you say that for today, we can all try to be more like Franklin. He not only helped craft the sentence that defines our common good, he lived it. He organized police, fire, street sweeping, a public library, a hospital. He ran a newspaper. He bequeathed a revolving loan fund. He donated to the building funds of each and every church in Philadelphia. He helped lead the fundraising for a new hall that would provide a pulpit to visiting preachers of any belief, so that, quote, even if the Mufti of Constantinople were to send a missionary to preach Mohammedanism to us, he would find a pulpit at his service. And on his deathbed, he was the largest individual donor to the Congregation Mikveh Israel, the first synagogue in Philadelphia.
And so when he dies, instead of his minister accompanying his casket to the grave, all 35 ministers, preachers, and priests link arms with the rabbi of the Jews and march with him to the grave. That's what you talk about innovation and fearlessness. That's what they were setting up back then, a new type of nation based on individual liberty, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, in which we also allowed people of different backgrounds, great diversity, to all come together And this was something that didn't exist on Earth up
And
until
you
then.
chose to bring that out in this short book, presumably because you think...
Well, I presumably think
in
in the 250th we ought to get back to why we, in the United States, created this nation. And we have drifted from those basic principles that approximately 80%, whether England, United States, could agree on. And yet social media, our politics, our current administrations have so divided us. I am old enough to remember when we were just this divided. I was just working with Harry Evans. He had me working on Watergate, 1974. We'd gone through Vietnam, Watergate, the resignation of a president, riots, the assassinations of Kennedys and Kings. And we had the bicentennial in the United States. Rang the Liberty Bell, tall ships came up, and we all came together and healed as a nation. A few of us who write history got together 4 or 5 years ago and said, we got to help celebrate the 250th. Meacham did American Struggle. Ken Burns has just done the Revolution. And I'm sad to say that somehow or another, even this anniversary hasn't helped remind us that we share certain values and we should not allow ourselves to be torn apart.
Yeah, that's interesting to know the backstory that a group of you have been preparing for your response to this for some time. And Ken Burns has been one of my guests on the podcast. Walter Isaacson, I look forward to the next book, and thank you so much.
Michelle, thank you.
Thank you.
You're great.
Yes, the stories almost no one is telling, but should be. Hello there, I'm Anna Botting. I work at Sky News. And as we saw there, local news should not be a luxury item. It really should be a necessity. As we all know, community journalism binds neighbours together. It gives cohesion. It gives vitality. It can expose wrongdoing or corruption by officials who are having the most impact on our lives, holding power to account where we live and where we work. And when those local, thank you for the clap, when those local news watchdogs are not watching, we are left in the dark. We're being impacted, but knowing nothing. So please welcome then two people helping fill the vacuum left by what we mostly call the sad decline of local news. One with a camera, one with a laptop. So please welcome documentary filmmaker Jeannie Finley and Yoshi Herman, who founded and runs Mill Media, an independent newsletter and website producing high quality, in-depth local journalism. And both of you doing amazing work, I have to say. Jeannie, let's start with you. Yours is a story of a local community devastated by historic pollution, toxic industrial waste. Your documentary follows Stan, a fisherman for more than 50 years on Teesside in the northeast of England. He becomes an unwitting activist, pushing back against the local government when the fishing ecosystem collapses from industrial toxins released during dredging of the River Tees. You describe it as a David and Goliath story. Was it getting any coverage, and how did you find out about it?
Well, thanks for that introduction. This is a story that's really close to my heart because it's where I grew up. It's where my mum swims in the sea 3 times a week. And as soon as I heard about the story, I just knew that I had to, I make feature-length documentaries, and I knew that this was going to be my next film. It's been getting some local coverage, but it's really the difference you can make with 100 minutes filmed over 4 years is it's infinitely different to a 3-minute piece on local news or a tiny story in the local paper. And the local paper is not what it was. The Northern Echo is not what it was in Harry Evans' time. They're not able, and also there's some conflicts going on there that it's quite challenging to tell the stories of actually what's going on in the area.
Well, you had me, I have to say, the opening credits. It is beautifully shot. The subject matter makes you want to weep, quite frankly. And it is not yet released in the UK. Stan really is to Teesside fishing what Alan Bates was to the post office. Let's be honest about it. So shall we have a look at your documentary then? It's called All Rivers Spill Their Stories to the Sea. Let's have a look.
On my mum's side, you can trace our fishing back 400 or 500 years, and they're all fisher folk from just in front of where I live, fish from the beach.
What's your view then about why the government just won't get to the answer?
We stupid thick fishermen, they're educated and it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, right.
Problem is, that sea's job's worth billions. Of course it is. Ours is worth $1 million. That's the difference. It's that. So they're not interested in us.
Levelling up. They've levelled Teesside down to the ground, and it has been for decades. And it's terrible the way we're treated.
Can't sell boats, can't give them away, nobody wants them. I have 3. So I'll probably bring my neck in it. You know what I mean? I should be 6'3" and I'm not only 5'6".
And told, we can't rock the boat. The local authority advertises with the paper, and the paper can't upset the relationship with Tees Valley Combined Authority. The media in the UK is so focused on London and Westminster that there's no scrutiny, there's no resources to scrutinise what's happening in a place like this.
Yes, that's big round of applause. Very well deserved as well, I have to say. Terrible footage of the crustaceans there. They're twitching on the beach in some of the footage. The fishermen lamenting their appalling catches. You track the timeline of what happened. A dredger, it seems, disturbing ground, polluted over decades from chemical oil steelworks, the heartland, the industrial heartland that Teesside's known for. Has the loss of local news left a void in which these stories are not being told? It gives a voice to those genuinely who feel that no one is listening to them.
I think so, yeah. I mean, like I said, the luxury of making a feature-length documentary, an independent documentary, means that I can do something that is much more than a caricature. I can get to know Stan, and I can foreground the emotion. What does this feel like? I'm over the shoulder while Stan launches a crowdfunding campaign to bring independent scientists together because they're just not getting the answers. And it's been devastating. Science is slow, movement is slow, and they're just trying to find, they just want someone to listen to them because it's been forgotten. And when I showed Stan the finished film, he said that the experience has been like a bereavement, and actually being able to show that change over time because time had elapsed felt like he'd been seen for the first time, and it was very moving.
And as we know, those who are not being heard change politics. You might argue the Brexit count was like that. We'll see what the politics of protest are in the elections tomorrow as well. But Yoshi, you started with one digital newspaper in Manchester. Since then, you've expanded into 5 more cities, so 6 in total. You've got another one coming very soon, haven't you? So what made you decide to report on life politics and more on this community or city level, and how are you going about it?
Well, I think one of the reasons I wanted to do it is because there are so many good stories. I mean, Jeannie's amazing film is an amazing story that the national media were not covering very much, and the local media, which has been really kind of like pulled back to the bones, especially in the northeast, but really anywhere, are not able to cover it in a sustained way. And so there are stories like that all across the country. And so local journalism has been hit much harder by the forces that we've been talking about today than national journalism has. I mean, there were, I think, around 9,000 people who worked in local journalism in 2007 in the UK, just for the largest 3 companies, by the way, but that's a sort of rough estimate from Press Gazette. And now they think it's around 3,000. So that's 6,000 fewer in the space of, not very long at all. And so I guess when I started out, I thought there must be loads of really good stories here, and I think it'll be fun to try and tell them, and I think there'll be some social good out of it too. And actually, I remembered as we were walking in, the last time I was here at Truth Tellers on stage, I got off the stage and I went up to a little room that Tina's team had provided. And I was on the phone to our lawyer, and I was on the phone to Jack Dillhunty, who's a brilliant journalist who works for us and who's here. And Jack was just about to publish a story about a local official in Manchester, Andy Burnham's advisor, Sacha Lord. And Jack's story revealed that Sacha Lord had a company that had sort of illegitimately got hold of hundreds of thousands of pounds during the pandemic from the government in pandemic relief by pretending it was one kind of company when it in fact was another. And within 2 days of Truth Tellers, or perhaps even a day, Sacha Lord was threatening to sue us, etc., etc. It took us a few days of solid reporting to get the government to change its position, to get the Greater Manchester Authority to change its position. It took 7 months of Jack reporting on this story for the Arts Council to eventually say, you guys were right, we got it wrong, we're going to ask for the money back. And that's public money, So there's a lot of stories like this, and it later transpired that the local newspaper in Manchester did know about this story and hadn't reported on it. So there are loads of these stories. Jeannie's told an amazing one. There are so many of these stories that because of the decimation of local journalism are not being told, and it's a great challenge to try and rebuild that infrastructure.
Well, you're trying to build a community. I know you have live events for Mill members where staff come on stage and you'll explain their favourite stories. So let's try that here, shall we?
Yeah.
Why don't you give us some of your favourite stories from the past year?
Well, one that really stands out for me actually is one about a university called the University of Greater Manchester. Anyone who remembers what it used to be called Bolton University. They changed the name to attract foreign students, I think. And one of my reporters, Molly Simpson, who was here last year, I think, another brilliant young journalist, she over months discovered that there was a secret side deal, which is on screen now, in which a senior executive at the university was effectively attempting to divert large amounts of money to a private company that he owned. And, it took probably a few different stories to get to this one. This was probably the biggest one. But after this came out, things really started to happen. And eventually what happened was the police in Greater Manchester announced an investigation. The vice-chancellor of the university of 20 years stepped down, or was suspended, actually. And then they had house raids, police house raids, on 7 properties. So now there's an active, live police investigation. That's an incredible piece of reporting, and I think that's one where you can see the impact. Another one, I was told it was going to be on screen. I don't think I'm actually allowed to really talk about it because there's just been an arrest. I don't know if you can show the next story. So I think there was another story about. Here we go. So it's just been long listed for the poor foot. So I think I'm allowed to read out what Private Eye said about it. But effectively, this was a very sort of litigious lawyer who was writing to homeowners in actually, various places that we cover. And it took months of really good reporting to really bring the story to light. I think because he's now been arrested, contempt rules mean I can't really sort of say much about it, but I think I can read out the police statement, which is, detectives investigating allegations linked to the purchase and sale of freeholds in Sheffield have arrested a man on suspicion of fraud and blackmail. I think that's probably all that can be said. But, again, that's really focused investigative journalism. I mean, you can see how many of my colleagues are named on that awards nomination. That's a lot of people working incredibly hard, led by Daniel Timms. That's the kind of journalism that, unfortunately, a lot of local newspapers, for a variety of reasons, are not able to take on anymore.
Yeah, exactly. what about some of the problems that you're butting into? Effectively, you're from Teesside, where your film is set, but your funding came from across the world, even in New York. Why did you have to look so far away? What about the local outrage for that story? What did it take you to tell that story?
I think as an independent maker, I know that once I'm making a film, I can set the tone, and I know that the title, my long title of my film, will be the title I want to have, and that I can have editorial control. So it's vital that the funding is independent, and there is money in the North, but when the money for film comes across the desk of the local authority that you are critiquing, it means that it's no longer an option. So this is a local story that has global consequences and a global audience, so we look globally for the money. So working with brilliant partners like Chicken and Egg, BFI Doc Society, it means that we can remain independent and do the independent work that would be absolutely impossible if we were making this for a streamer. I need to be nimble. I need to have a small camera and not, and not make something. I'm not making streamer content. I'm making independent filmmaking.
Well, the first session we had this morning, we heard about the pre-litigation that news stories are having now, and the fact that we pre-censor ourselves. But for a small independent, if I can call you that now, I know you're expanding quite quickly, how difficult is it to take on the so-called establishment, and how worrisome then is a legal threat for an independent operation like yours?
I think at the moment in the UK, the threat of legal action is a huge reason that big stories don't appear. A big reason. I mean, that story I told you before about Sacha Lord, the one in Manchester, a couple of newspapers were going to follow it up a day after we published, and they didn't because of the legal threat that was made. They didn't do that. I was downstairs earlier and someone I knew said, "How's your legal case going?" And I said, "Which one?" I've got two. We were in the High Court recently defending a defamation action for a story we published on The Londoner, which is our London operation. I'll be in a court in Liverpool in June defending another case that's been brought against us for our journalism. So currently the way the laws are written in the UK allows people to bring bad faith lawsuits against stories that are true and that have been really well reported. And I think until the government acts and changes the law, there has been some protection put into the law about anti-slaps when it comes to financial stories. But what you really need is for that to be extended to lots of other forms of journalism. Because at the moment, it is a big drain on our time and on our resources.
Well, aren't you battling one this week? Is it?
Well, I mean, just on Friday night, we did a story on The Dispatch, which is our Birmingham publication, about the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. And her special advisor, 7 p.m. on a Friday night, sent an incredibly aggressive legal threat. He threatened us with defamation, privacy, and potentially an imminent injunction in the High Court to stop us publishing. I mean, I think he did that because he thought this is a small local publication in Birmingham and I can bully them. And then as soon as we got back in touch and said, hang on, we don't appreciate those kind of threats and we're going to make your threats part of the story, we put them in, paragraph 5 was about the threat and we named the advisor because I think it's important to name people when they threaten you. Suddenly, he said, well, actually, it wasn't sent from a government, from the government. Well, it came from a government email. You signed it off special advisor to the Home Secretary. So it sure felt like it came from the government. And the government, threatening to sue a small independent media company, I don't think that's quite right. So that is the kind of threat that I know is stopping publication of important stories, particularly in local journalism across the country every day. And I think it's got to be fixed.
Well, just one final thought. I worked in the Northeast as well, in local news. It's very close to my heart. I saw the last 5 coal mines close. I saw the last shipyard close as well, with all the Labour politicians in tears as a Type 23 left Swan Hunter. I felt like I was witnessing the end of the Industrial Revolution, quite honestly. What you've seen is ecosystem disaster, as the heritage of manufacturing is literally removed. And the question is how much, we should suffer to see progress. And we know planning laws in this country, they want to speed them up. There are more free ports being built. This was all to build Teesport. Do you feel like you're telling the parable of an age, really?
Yeah, I really feel like this, the fishers of Teesside are the canary in canary in the coal mine.
That's the one, yes.
There's another 10 free ports planned around the UK, and most of them are where the river meets the sea. I think only one of them is inland. That needs to be done incredibly carefully. You know, when I was an art student in Middlesbrough, we used to go out and paint the industry. It was the opening of Blade Runner by Ridley Scott was inspired by the Teesside industry. These things have a long life. All of the seal pups in the area have died because of PCBs that were banned in the 1980s. We need to remember history, or we will continually repeat it.
And one final thought from you as well, Yoshi. Sir Harry Evans obviously worked up there. You were telling us earlier that actually, you know, what you can see in the history of the Northern Echo really does explain the demise of local media.
Totally. I mean, he started his career on the Ashton-under-Lyne Reporter, which is near where I live, and then he went to the Northern Echo. And at the Northern Echo, when he was there in the 1960s, you had an enormous team. You had hundreds of people working in the Northern Echo. And I actually looked in his book, and there were 12 reporters in the Bishop
Auckland.
Bishop Auckland office of the Northern Echo. Jeannie and I have been trying to estimate whether there are still 12 reporters in the entire Northern Echo now. And I think they're probably, you know, it would be about that. So that, you know, that is a very, very big decline in the number of people trying to find stories in a very important part of the country. And we need to try and sort of rebuild that capacity, I think.
Well, times, they are a-changing, as we all know, in the world of media. Your work is extraordinary. You know, congratulations from me, certainly. So, Jeannie Finlay, Yoshi Herman, thank you very much indeed. And one final thought as well, before you clap, there are more films to be seen tomorrow at the Truth Tellers Docfest. All the details are coming on your screen, so do stay tuned for that. Both of you, thank you. Thank you.
The rock stars have arrived. The power of photographs and the importance of photojournalism. The photographers here are the original storytellers. And David Walmsley, I'm David Walmsley, the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail, and it's an absolute honour to welcome this illustrious panel. Lindsay Adario, to my immediate right, Hannah Mackay, Reuters, and Marcus Yam of the Globe and Mail. Welcome. The images you'll see in this session will be upsetting. That's the whole point. We are here because we care, and we don't shy away from the reality of the world. And as Lindsay said to me off stage, if you're not upset by some of this, then you are AI. The sentient human being has more power than they realize, I think, in this current climate. My first question, Lindsay, is to you, because you've traveled so often. Harry Evans loved you. And you would meet often with him and commune. But you had to choose the stories to go to. And most recently, for the Atlantic magazine, under new ownership, very strong publication, you've been to Sudan and Chad. Let's take a look at some of the photos. Tell us about this child.
So, just to back up a little bit, I started covering Sudan over 20 years ago when I was covering the war in Darfur. And I went there for 6 straight years, and I thought it was in my rearview mirror. And of course, a few years ago, I started talking to the Atlantic, and last year they asked me to go to Sudan with Anne Applebaum, who was here earlier.